You wake before the bell, before the geese stir, before the ditches think to speak. The light is not here yet, only a suggestion folded into the window's seam, a gray undecided about itself. You lie and listen to the boards hold their breath, and the thatch murmur as if remembering yesterday's wind. Damp sits in the wool and in your bones, not sharp, only steady. You rise by habit, not hurry. The room receives you like a quiet stable, receives a careful step. Your feet find the clogs under the bed, but you do not put them on. Their click would wake what should sleep. In wool socks, you cross to the shutter. The bar lifts with a familiar rasp, a wooden prayer without words. You ease it open enough to see a ribbon of field. Still, paths glossy, where night laid its hand. No rain falls now, yet everything gleams as if recently told a secret. You count your breaths, one for the nearest willow, one for the far stump, one for the alder row smudging the horizon. You lean your ears toward the low places. Here, the ditches and creeks do not hurry. They move as if reading, steady and syllable by syllable, and you have learned to read with them. The air carries wet earth and crushed reed. Somewhere a cartwheel ticks, then is gone. No voices yet, only a cock too proud to be patient. You think of the birds before you think of yourself. They do not know what water means until it touches their toes. They know grain, warm straw, and the safe dark beneath the loft. You picture them in the coop, a soft mound of breath and feather, heads tucked, claws curled. If the yard turns to a sheet of brown glass, they will not understand why ground becomes mirror. You repeat your rule: higher, drier, calmer. The loft above the stable will do. The ladder is sound. The baskets are ready. You feel the planks cool knot under your heel when you step away from the window. The house tells small stories through your feet. In the corner, the lantern waits with its iron mouth shut. Wick trimmed last night. Tallow a small moon. You do not light it. There is enough gray to see the path your hands will take. You set your cloak on your shoulders and test the pocket where grain will ride. Small things in the right place make the day move like a slow hymn. You open the door as a courtesy, not an announcement. The hinge sighs. The yard breathes in, breathes out. Carts, fence, trough, post the same square of the world, but edged with water's memory. The straw you scattered yesterday holds against the wet, bright as dry bread. You crouch and touch it. It answers with a shy rustle that settles chickens and children and you. Far off, over the meadow, a bell coughs, once perhaps the watcher testing his rope, perhaps only your thought, learning how to listen. You step onto the plank walk, socks tasting the morning chill. The clogs hang on the peg. You carry them instead, one in each hand, so their hard talk will not ripple the quiet. The boards you laid over soft ground last autumn still sit where you set them, gray as the sky and stubbornly useful. Each step gives a little, then steadies, and you think that patience is a good tool disguised as time. The coop leans into the stable's lee like a child at a mother's skirt. The thatched cap you tied last week holds, straw pointing everywhere like a hedgehog's back. Your palm meets the door's grain. Inside, there is a glow without light, the body warmth of hens pressed together. You do not lift the latch yet. You listen first. Roosting has a grammar, small throat scrapes, breathy protests, the surprised burble of a half-dreaming bird. You answer with your own quiet noises, more breath than word. You look past the coop to the far ditch and make the small sums you make after heavy weather. The water has climbed a thumb on the gatepost. No more. The path to the barn will hold. The ladder will cross the worst dip without bounce. If the wind swings west, the millstream sluice will send a kinder thought this way. If it does not, you have ropes and baskets and the loft. You do not argue with the sky. You prepare in the way that makes argument unnecessary. You set the clogs beside the coop and draw your cloak closer at the throat. A hen senses you and gives the soft syllable that means both inquiry and relief. Soon, not now. First you check the latch string, test the peg, and pass your fingertips along the sill for soft spots the wet might have found. The wood is thirsty but whole. In your mind you lay the morning like slices of bread lantern, bucket, ladder, grain. Your body will remember even if your thoughts wander. Light strengthens by a color you feel more than name. Less pewter, more worn tin. The first human voice arrives far along the road, wrapped in fog, so it sounds like shape before words. A neighbor perhaps, guiding a cow to higher ground. The cow calls once, the world answers with quiet. The sound fades. You think of the square and the belfry that speaks when wind or river asks too much. Of men with hooks and poles who mind the sluices. Of dikes that hold because hands remember them. You touch the door again and settle your breathing into the rhythm you will keep all day. Nothing here is dramatic. Everything here matters. The sky wears modest intentions. The earth takes its time. The birds will wake when it pleases them, and you will be ready to lift them, to carry them, to make small heights out of ladders and straw, and the ordinary mercy of wooden pegs. You lift the latch, the sound neat and certain. Morning begins. You pause at the door and listen until the wood beneath your palm remembers to be still. The plank is cool, damp braided into its grain like an old hymn. A thin draft maps your cheekbone with patient fingers. Reed, silt, trampled nettle, these are the first flavors of the day. You do not hurry. Listening is a chore here, as exact as sweeping, and you do it before rope or latch. You match breath to counting. In, out, 1, 2. Far off, a soft click becomes water meeting water. A bead leaving the thatch to kiss the ditch. You give it 2 heartbeats. Then a reed whisper travels the bank, the wind remembering names. 3 beats for that. Somewhere a sleepy cow turns her chain. You let the sounds take their turns, courteous as neighbors at a narrow gate. The sill complains where your thumb presses. You rub the spot as one rubs a patient animal, and the wood forgives you. Beyond the frame, the sky is still only an idea of light. Wind plucks at the thatch and smooths it again, undecided. West breath brings a tin taste of sea. North breath brings peat smoke from a cautious hearth. You tilt your head a finger's width and sort your neighbors by scent. The ditches wait like mirrors set into fields. You know their voices. The willow corner chuckles when hooves muddle it. The flax run keeps counsel when water is sure of itself. The cross at the lane pretends shallows until it is not. You count time between shy lap and slow drawl, bead by bead. Longer than last night, shorter than last spring. You prefer lazy numbers. You open the door a finger's width and let a slim blade of air pass the threshold. It moves like a guest who assumes invitation. Your cheek learns more than your eyes. Steady, not scolding. A hand on a shoulder that says, wait. You nod as if wind were watching. Good manners cost nothing, and often purchase good sense. Inside, a spoon ticks when the draft finds its hollow. You turn it so the rounded back faces the room, a small superstition against weather's mischief. The chickens murmur and sleep, counting dreams in beak clicks. You do not answer. Their calm is coin. You will spend it later. You lift the lantern not to light it, only to feel the iron curve and the dry wick's promise. Rope smells of last summer's sun. Baskets recall marsh days and patient willow. The cloak remembers warm mash. Work is a comfort because the body knows before the mind declares. Again you listen. In the lane, a puddle gives a good-tempered lip smack. From the meadow comes a dull thud, maybe a stake set, maybe a clod letting go. You put 2 heartbeats between thud and echo and call the day moderate. Calm hours accept wider numbers. Haste pinches them until even your ribs grow stingy. A bell breathes once from far away, then holds its tongue. Perhaps the watcher stretches a rope. Perhaps a boy has found metal too tempting. You allow this to be nothing yet. If it becomes something, it will repeat itself properly. You have stopped borrowing other people's alarms. You set 1 foot onto the plank and let the ground speak. The board gives a gentle lift and settle, like a boat tied to a friendly post. You approve of its manners and step back. Through the thumb's width crack, morning leans in more frankly. The draft crosses your cheek with wet sweetness, like hay that forgot itself in rain and now pretends it wanted a bath. Let your mind walk the yard while the body stands. Ladder sound, dependable as a proverb. Planks from coop to barn, willing if you do not demand speed. Loft roost high and dry, straw spread even. Baskets nested like modest boats against their bank. You picture the short carry, the quiet after, feathers settling as height explains itself. Small lives understand comfort in any language. Your hand tests the grain pocket, enough for coaxing songs you sing without words. One barley kernel warmed and returned with ceremony. Open now? Not yet. Wait for one more voice from the flax ditch. Decisions made after water speaks age well. The others crack like poor pots. On the sill, a reed whistle waits from last month's idle minute. You give it a breath not strong enough to wake what deserves sleep. A thin kindness comes back at once. One hen answers under her breath. You set the whistle away. Best not teach a habit a storm can mock. At your feet, a stray straw journeys until the threshold persuades it to feel important. The house smells of damp wool, beeswax, and onion from last night's pot. You list them the way a clerk lists coin-proof of modest wealth, ordinary and sufficient. Wind slips and returns with a memory of salt. The sea is not near, only near enough to send advice. It is an old neighbor who speaks without invitation and expects a nod. You give it the nod. Courtesy never harms a day that leans toward water. You lean your ear to the crack and count again. 1, 2, 3, lap at the willow. 1, 2, whisper by the flax. 1, 2, 3, 4, puddle answer in the lane. The numbers make a small, clean map behind your eyes. A duck laughs somewhere and translates your counting into its own language. Ducks believe they invented water. Kindness allows them the story. You hang the lantern back on its hook and settle the cloak at your throat. The morning has said enough. No rush, no pride. A little height for small lives. Patience paid out in boards and baskets and easy hands. You touch the door once, a brief pat as one gives a friend. I have heard you, it means. Then you take up the day, one careful sound at a time. You lift the latch with 2 fingers. The peg gives a small, well-bred pop, and the door tilts inward a knuckle. You let the darkness keep its dignity. Your eyes travel slowly, like a scribe reading a familiar hand. Feathers become shapes by degrees. The coop breathes in patches. Straw hushes. A sleepy beak taps and forgets why. You stand at the seam between chill and barn warmth and count to 6 before you move. The air carries last night's mash, a hint of tallow you didn't light, and that clean animal pepper that means health. No sourness, only wet on the sill where raindrops traded stories. Your palm finds the rim of cold, an honest edge. The morning's mood sketches itself, ordinary, persuadable, not cruel. The hens arrange themselves like parishioners who expected a longer sermon and now cannot admit relief. Comb, eye, shoulder, the slow accordion of breath. You greet them with a sound that is neither word nor whistle. The low hive note you learned from your grandmother. One amber eye opens and allows you. Another loosens her toes and stretches a leg the length of a prayer. The broody lump in the corner keeps her opinion. You slide the door wider and slip inside. The floor greets you with a soft give of last year's rye straw. Your socks steal the cold from it and keep going. You tip the water crock to the door light. No film, no flex. The rim smells of clay and clean hands. A hen leans to drink and blinks at her watery twin. You test the roosts. The beam bows properly patience, not rot. 2 perches, a step apart, because pride likes tears. The quiet elders above, the talkers below. You press with both thumbs. Where you once saw softness, it behaves. You nod, as if you plan philosophy rather than convenience. A rustle near your hip announces the small committee that thinks it runs the place. 3 hens, equal parts suspicion and curiosity. You offer your palm. They inspect the grains you hid there and pretend they were about to go to the loft anyway. When beaks begin their tidy arithmetic, the room loosens another notch. Here work is done more with tone than muscle. You tip the baskets you plaited last winter in case a spider has taken deeds. One has, so you move her empire intact to the lintel. Willow remembers your fingers when you lift the first basket. The handle polishes your palm. Knots where cord meets rib are still stout. You picture them later tied to loft posts like courteous boats, allowed to nod but not wander. You lean to the nest boxes. Eggs sit like guarded moons in straw halos. You do not gather them now. Today is for height, not harvest. Still, you smile at the rightness of round things doing what round things do. A hen sighs in your shadow and forgives you for counting what you did not take. Outside the door slit, the yard shows its sleeve. A plank, a bragging puddle, the shoulder of the stable. Rain holds off. considering whether to stamp. You look up to the thatch cap. No drip at the seam. The reed plug you pushed yesterday deserves its smugness. You speak once more, that low creek bed tone, and lift the nearest hen. She is briefly all attention, then remembers you and reduces to a bowl of warmth. Your fingers find keelbone, the tidy ladder of ribs, the soft drums of breath. You set her on the up, per bar, and wait for claws to say content. The second hops up before you ask. The third detours, finds the argument thin, and follows dignity to its seat. With your hip, you nudge the feed trough. It moves with the proper reluctance of a thing doing its job. You wipe the rim with sackcloth, dab the damp from the corner where comfort collects, and wedge a chip beneath 1 foot so grain won't travel south. A little height persuades even food to behave. You duck under the lower bar and sight along the wall where the wattle tells weather truth. The daub has taken a bruise of damp below the window, but it will brown and forget. You press a finger and take away a cool print. Not yet trouble. You leave the shutter pegged, a finger's width for breath and news. At last you give the room your judgment. Not a ship, not a cellar, a sound, small country, fit for citizens to travel from here to loft without surprise. Your eyes have gathered their map, slow street by slow street. You draw your cloak's edge across your mouth and feel your thoughts stack like kindling. A hen scolds a corner where nothing stands guilty. You agree solemnly that corners are suspicious and deserve a word. She relaxes, having won. You lift 2 baskets to the door and set them where the day can see them. The yard answers with a faint reed rattle and behaves as if it approves. Somewhere a cart axle sighs, resigning itself to wet roads. You breathe with the coop once, like oars agreeing with water. You close the door to a kindly sliver and rest the latch against its home without pressing it in. When the sky lightens 1 more finger, you will begin the lifting. For now the coop holds together like a word, said by many mouths at once. You listen to that shared syllable and let it settle your ribs. You take the ladder from its nail like an old friend, borrowed for a small favor. The stiles ride your shoulder with a remembered pressure, smooth from years of hands and seasons of sun. 1 rung taps your knee as if keeping time. The wood smells faintly of smoke and of river, because everything in this yard keeps a little river in it. You walk with the steady sway that ladders ask for, head level so the world does not think you are in a hurry. Across the yard, the wet run lies where the path forgot itself and turned into a suggestion. It is not a river. It only pretends. A thin brown shoulder, slipping through reed and nettle, pleased with how well it can surprise a boot. You pause at its near bank and read the surface as you might read a face. No spit, no glare, only a quiet shrug. Modest water is a polite neighbor if you meet it with boards. You set the foot of the ladder on the driest tuft, toes hidden in grass like cautious swimmers. Your hands find the balance without thinking. 1 palm lifts, 1 palm lowers, and the world turns until the far stile touches earth with a soft, satisfied kiss. The ladder settles as a cat does, pretending this was its idea all along. You wait. Waiting is half of placing. You let the weight travel down the rungs and into the sod and watch the slight sink, the small tilt. You try the first rung with your toe, then the second with a heel, offering it your weight in measured coins. The latter answers with a low, useful song, the kind of creak that means honesty, not complaint. You test the span with a gentle bounce of your knees, counting to 4 and back again. The water underneath frowns, then thinks better of it. You step onto the first rung, 1 hand on a stile, the other keeping the cloak close. Each rung accepts you like a simple sentence. Subject, verb, object. Done. Halfway across, you sway a friendly inch to see if the ladder keeps its manners. It does. It is a plain thing doing a plain job. On the far bank you kneel and slide a flat stone under the foot, a small courtesy so the stile does not sink. You pat it once, approval and gratitude both. Then you return, stepping backward, because your arms want to mind the hens and your eyes want to mind the water, both at once. You step down with a small exhale of a person who has explained something and been understood. You go back along the span, this time with the day's errand walking beside you. The ladder bridge will carry baskets, feed, and the dignity of small feet that have no patience for cold toes. You imagine the hen's first tentative steps, 1 foot placed like a question, The second is the answer. The third saying, well then, of course. You test the width with your palm spread, like measuring cloth. 3 palms, from stile to stile, enough for a hen and a second opinion. You look for any proud splinter that might scold a foot and rub it down with the tail of your sock. The rung ends you love best have that dark shine that comes when usefulness sits a long time with kindness. You consider tying a guiding string, then decide your voice will be corridor enough. The sky wears pewter, mellowed by thumbprints. The wind argues only with taller things today. You count the reeds beside you, 3 stiff men in green coats keeping their opinions. You bring 2 pegs and drive them in at the near stile with the heel of your palm, a rhythm that wakes no one and persuades the mud to hold court. A shorter peg kisses the far stile and promises steadiness for the hours that matter. The bridge is now more committed than some cousins at a saint's day. You cross twice more, not because you doubt, but because habit makes a priest of you, and this is your small litany. Foot, foot, breathe. Foot, foot, breathe. When you finish, the ladder has become not a tool but a place, and places are what keep tempers level. You fetch the little rake with the broken tooth and comb the muck at both banks, letting the water see its edges. Edges calm creatures. They are where decisions live. You lay a reed cluster below the first rung, so the hen's eyes will read, not deep. Above the far bank you shake a little barley like polite rain. The bridge now has a story. Across here, then kindness. You pause and look back toward the coop. The door wears its quiet. Inside, the room hums with the soft mathematics of breathing birds. You picture the path from threshold to ladder, from ladder to loft, the morning becoming a sentence with commas instead of exclamation. Even the mud seems to approve, choosing not to climb the rungs just now. You set your palm flat on the upper stile and feel the damp cool travel into your skin, not chill, only common sense. The ladder is older than some barn cats and has never pretended to be anything but helpful. This is the whole art today, making small heights, making near ways. A single drop releases from the thatch, falls between 2 rungs, and writes a brief punctuation on the run. You say aloud that this is acceptable. The day does not argue. You give the ladder a last, fond pat, neither promise nor farewell. It is ready. You are ready. The water is busy elsewhere with its own stories. All this is plain and properly boring, which is to say, perfect. You fetch the wicker crates from their corner by the stable door, where they have been behaving like quiet furniture. Willow remembers the hands that bent it. When you lift the first crate, it answers with a dry, good-natured squeak. The ribs wear a mellow gloss from many seasons. The bottom is a crosshatch of stiffer rods, space to scold muddy water and be kind to toes. You set the crate on the plank and count slats under your thumb. 12 on this one, 10 on the next. Nothing poetic, only numbers you can trust. You tip the basket to the pale light under the eaves. No split, no gap bigger than a whisker. The cord lugs you wove last winter, a loop here, a loop there, still sit firm. You nod to your past self with quiet approval. From the hook by the door, you take the coil of flax line. It smells faintly of redding ponds and evening smoke. You feed the line through your fingers until it warms. You cut 3 arm lengths, 1 for each long side, and 1 to tell the others how to behave. You begin at the far corner. The loop takes the line without argument. You make the simple turn you like, under, over, back through, and draw it snug until it lies like a thought that will not slip. You leave a generous tail. Water tugs at stingy knots. Your hands do not ask your mind for names. They make what works. You carry the line along the side, dip it through the next lug, and pull a modest belly so there is give without slack. At the middle, you add a loop that will marry a second line later, because crates travel better when tied to friends. Lug loop snug, lug loop snug. The rhythm is slow enough to be kind to fingers and quick enough to satisfy a hen's sense of occasion. When the first side is laced, you turn the crate. The second line runs twin to the first. The third crosses the belly like a belt. Where they meet, your knots sit in a tidy square, neither handsome nor ugly, simply right. You tug once, twice. The basket hums a little answer. You step to the barrel that pretends to be a horse trough when the cow is not watching. You dip with the ladle until the rim throws back a dull sky. 2 small reed bundles go in first, a trick from children who play boats too well. When you settle the empty crate on the surface, the reeds meet its belly and remind it that upward is an option. You press the basket down with one hand until water begins to think it has an opinion. Willow holds, the lines hold, the reeds make courage beneath. You let go. The crate rises with slow contentment and finds its level. You turn it, watching for any tilt that would make a hen compose complaints. The corners stay modest. You approve. In your mind, the yard already wears a mild brown mirror. The crate will not swim. It will simply refuse to sink. You will tether it to a loft post, give it just enough leash to nod, and let chickens learn the dignity of boats. It is not heroic. It is sufficient. You bring the second crate forward and find a blistered slat at the lower edge. You smooth it with the back of your knife and bind it with a narrow reed withe until it remembers its manners. You lace it like the first. Your fingers keep time with the rain's far patience. From a shelf, you take the small toggle you carved from a broken peg. You thread it on the loose tail beneath the square where the three lines meet, a small weight to keep the belly low without asking for drama. You think of the crate sitting in a hand's breadth of water, less skittish for a pebble's counsel. You fetch the awl and test each cord where it passes a lug. One place squeaks of dry. You rub the line with a smear of tallow, the way one comforts a tight thought. The squeak is ashamed of itself and stops. On the sill, the reed whistle leans where you left it. You do not use it. The hens will have their opinions about crates, and you will persuade them with grain, not theater. You thread a separate lead through the mid-side loop you left waiting. This will be the courteous voice in front. A second line from the rear corner will be the tail, to keep the promenade from turning into a parade. You coil both generously. Nothing good comes of a rope that thinks it has been wronged. For a brief trial, a sack of chaff stands in for a hen with an appetite for drama. Lowered into the barrel, the reeds shoulder the weight. The lines hug the belly without sulking. The toggle settles as if choosing a favorite pocket. You slosh the water and watch the crate learn its sea legs. You set the dripping sack aside and place both crates by the door where a path of dry straw has been asking to be used. One will be the nursery boat for the younger fools. The other will be the quiet chapel for the broody madam, who refuses relocation without a footnote. Your house runs on diplomacy. The crates will assist. A drop slips from the eave and decorates your sleeve. You accept it as the day's signature. Across the yard, the ladder bridge waits with patient vanity. You tie the leads into loose coils and hang them over your neck like a peddler's best argument. The crates knock each other companionably as you lift them. You pause to admire the plainness of the arrangement. Willow, flax, reed, water, nothing invented. Only ordinary things agreeing to behave like family. When the water comes, it should find chores already finished. You carry straw the way one carries comfort. Not too tight, not too loose. Arms full of a small rustling promise. The stable loft waits above with its tilted grin and steps that remember every careful foot. The ladder complains politely as you begin. A creak and a shy whisper. Nothing to discourage a person intent on dry. At the top, the loft greets you with hay house perfume sun, saved from last summer. Dust sweet as crumbs. Wood that learned patience. The boards under your socks are cool and honest. You set the first armful down, and the straw answers with a dry sigh that sounds like agreement. You shake the straw loose. Stems arc and land, making a thin yellow weather across the boards. You spread a path from the ladder mouth to the darkest corner, a runner explaining where feet should go. Here feet, here rest, here safety. You walk the rectangle with slow, choosing steps, listening for hollow gossip from the boards. A knot sings where two planks quarrel. You soothe them with a wedge. You lay thicker where a draft sneaks its opinions through the eaves. Hens dislike opinions that touch their toes. A double hand's depth will quiet the world to a pleasant hush. You test with your palm and hear the hush. Down the ladder for another armful. Up again, careful not to kick the rails. The rhythm becomes the whole thought. Down, gather, up, spread. A hen clucks beneath, as if keeping your beat. By the little window you spare the spider's web. Spiders do competent work against flies with less politeness than rain. You pull the shutter to a narrower smile. You glance at the rafters that hold the thatch like a cradle. Between two runs a thin rope from some old convenience. You test it. It will bear a basket if one needs resting beyond curious beaks. You tie a small loop there. More straw. You make a generous island around the ladder's top. First steps deserve kindness. You slope the straw a whisper away from the door, so damp will wander off and dry into a story no one tells. You leave a narrow strip of bare boards before each roosting bar. Claws like honesty before comfort. You approve of this persnickety mind. You find the old feed sack patched twice, lettered by a vanished hand, and lay it where the floor shows a crack. The sack flattens its history beneath the straw. You press the edge with your heels so it will not travel during evening affairs, such as turning once or dreaming of grain. The light grows more certain. Straw collects the certainty and makes a warm color of it. You scatter a few handfuls where tomorrow's eggs may consider their future. Soft nests are simple negotiations. You sweep your forearm along the boards to check for splinters, the way a baker checks for flour. A sharpness earns a rub with the back of your knife. You test again and grant the place a nod. A hen's foot is small. Down and up once more. You carry less each trip so your breath keeps its soft manners. In the corner, where wall meets beam, you plant a little heap to teach cold air it is not in charge. You smooth the hilltop with a flat palm. From the low beam you take the short beater stick. You thump the straw here and there, not to flatten, only to settle. Dust rises in a holy little incense. You turn your cheek so it will gild the air without gilding your nose. It smells of last harvest and older summers. You set 2 shallow trays on the new straw near the wall. Later you will pour grit and a sting of ash there. Chickens enjoy a dignified bath, as much as any person swears they do not. Leaving the trays now makes the loft feel like a room. You scratch a line with your heel where you want the first crate to rest when it arrives. A little line is a contract. You rub the straw away across the line to show the boards, and then cover them again. A secret between you and the floor. The hens will only enjoy the result. You step back and study the golden wood country you have made. It answers with quiet satisfaction, the kind you hear more with skin than ear. The boards now offer kindness, dressed as thrift. One more armful for measure. The straw drifts from your hands in a slow, forgiving fall. It lands and chooses to belong. You smooth it until the surface whispers, done. The boards have become a cloud that decided to be sensible. At the ladder's mouth you place a small reed mat as a threshold thought. Chaff gathers there by nature. You flick your fingers and ask the smallest bits to travel elsewhere. You lean your elbows on the sill and nod to the yard. The ladder bridge keeps still. The puddle preens. Below, the coop murmurs. The house smells of straw now, a kind, bright smell. You take one last slow turn around the loft and let the quiet nest in your ribs. You take the lantern from its hook and cup it like a small, sensible sun. The iron ring cools your knuckles. The horn panes remember smoke in winter. You trim the wick with the nail of your thumb, a pinch that teaches the flame to be modest. The first breath of brightness rounds the coop's edges. Feathers become hush. Straw becomes a whisper of gold. You hold the lantern low so shadows climb the walls instead of running along the floor. Hens accept walls shifting. They mistrust floors that flicker. You hum the seam song that means peace and let it settle. The latch lifts without a quarrel. One amber eye opens. The rest keep their bargains with sleep. You place the lantern on its iron foot just inside and put your body between flame and birds so the glow arrives as weather, not surprise. Barley rustles in your pocket more promise than feast. You let a pinch patter into your palm. A beak answers with 2 tidy taps, satisfied that your arithmetic can be taught. You gather the first hen the way one gathers a warm jug. One hand under breastbone, one hand over folded wings. She is briefly all questions, then remembers you and becomes a careful loaf of breath. The basket by the door receives her. She arranges her toes like manners. You do not hurry the second. Lantern light pools along the roost so combs show and toes think ahead. You stroke the perch in front of the next hen. A touch she feels through wood the way you feel rain through a roof. Your other hand makes a small bridge from beam to breast. She steps onto it because bridges made of patience are persuasive. In the corner, the broody makes law. You nod to her invisible clerk and reserve the high rim basket for last. For now, you work a slow braid. Perch, palm, basket. Perch, palm, basket. Between transfers, you nudge the lantern back by a thumb, so the room dims and brightens like ordinary dawn. 3 hens consider hopping down. Your knee becomes a quiet hill and discourages the expedition without offense. They blink, agree that curiosity can be scheduled, and settle to the soft counting the straw suggests. You let your sleeve brush their shoulders. Familiar cloth speaks better than fresh words. The coop breathes with you. When you lift your chest, a dozen small bodies lift. When you loosen it, the room lowers. You ease your voice until it is only a shape the birds can lean against. Your world narrows to the space between a warm palm and a patient set of toes. A rooster leaks a whisper of pride and remembers to be brief. You promise him a higher rung later so authority will have something to stand on. He smooths one feather as if signing. The wick needs the smallest turn. You cradle the frame, nudge the brass. The flame bows and steadies. Horn blurs light into butter. 2 sisters panic louder alone, so you take them together, one under each arm, and walk the careful dance of elbows and balance. The baskets receive them like good pews, individual, familiar, reluctantly respectable. 3 kernels each seal the civility. The rub along the neck says the day contains no surprises you cannot solve. Now to the broody. You set the lantern at your ankle and kneel so the world comes to her height. Your hand draws a slow map across the straw. She permits it, stern dignity intact. The special basket takes her with a higher rim and a square of old sack for a curtain. She huffs once and becomes a statue with opinions. You count that a win made of quiet. When the baskets hold enough for a first journey, you leash the front loops with the flax lines and coil the rest around your wrist. Lantern first, to the damp pocket of the yard where sparks are nonsense. Cargo next. The ladder bridge waits, composed as a schoolmaster. You take small steps so barley will not sound like festival. The baskets knock a gentle quarrel against your shin. On the first rung you feel tilt and correction, wood recognizing your intention. The hens stare at the reed below and decide it is a picture, not a hole. The moment passes. You thank the sootnik on the good rung for its old superstition and keep moving. At the stable door you tug the latch with an elbow, let it yawn, and face the loft. Lantern up to the peg, baskets after, one at a time, parked on a rung while you shift feet and breath. Straw receives them like guests who arrive on time and wipe their shoes. You place the first crate where your heel line marked the floor, the second beside it, not touching. Leads go around post and rail in the modest square you favor. Over, under, back through, snug. Enough leash for a nod, not a voyage. Combs relax, thoughts settle. Back you go for the remainder. The lantern stays high, wick low, painting all this in a flattering honesty. Trip by trip, the roost becomes memory. Your breathing smooths until it matches the even board edges you trimmed. Last comes the rooster, who pretends he arranged it. You put him on a respectful perch, wedged between rafters so pride can see horizon. When everything feathered has moved into the dry country, you pinch the wick with a spit-wet pinch and let smoke draw one thin curl. Outside, the gray has turned tin. Rain keeps its counsel. You close the coop and leave its latch string hanging like a thin idea no one needs. You stand at the foot of the stable ladder and listen. Above, the crates murmur like small tools put away. You answer with tidy noises, rope tails coiled. A rim pressed, straw smooth to a low tide. The light remains ordinary. The day offers to be long. You check your pockets the way a careful cook checks a pot quietly, with respect for how little it takes to change a mood. Barley rides in the right pocket, oats in the left, each wrapped in a scrap of linen so the seams will not taste grit. You press your palm to the barley and let the kernels shift until they find one another and make their soft rain on reed sound. It is a sound that remembers autumn. It is a sound that persuades small hearts to step into the day. You keep your voice where barley lives, low, dry even, a whisper you could pour. You do not say words. Words would only show off. You let the syllables be shapes, little wooden bridges for birds to walk across. Grain rustles in your hand. Breath rustles in your throat. The room gathers itself around these 2 steady weathers and forgets to be nervous. You pinch 3 kernels and let them fall in the slow rhythm that says there will be more. The pattern matters. You do not drum. You do not tease. You spend the kernels as one spends a small coin often, with care and without ceremony. A comb lifts, a toe inches, a suspicious eye becomes a practical eye. This is how you move a flock, not by argument, by arithmetic. Your left pocket offers a second voice. Oats speak brighter, each hull a tiny click. You let them answer barley once every few heartbeats, just so curiosity will not feel neglected. Hens like choices the way people like doorways that do not slam. You keep the two pockets talking politely, and the coop remembers its manners. You lift your palm and show it to the nearest doubter. Your hand is the same hand as yesterday, and yesterday turned out acceptably. Her beak tastes one kernel, then another, then finds a rhythm that agrees with yours. You guide her step by step across the threshold with a line of grain that leads toward the ladder mouth. A path you can sweep up later is still a path. Behind you, the baskets murmur, willow rubbing willow. Your body becomes a quiet fence, turning fidget into forward without anyone feeling ordered. You pause when a wing thinks it might try ideas. Your voice lowers until an ear must lean close to hear. The wing forgets its ambitions and folds itself. You shift the barley to the lip of your pocket and work with fingertips only. The sound changes drier, more secret. A hen near the roost blinks herself awake and tilts her head to follow that secret. She steps down, discovers that her feet invented walking, and continues as if the thought had been hers all along. You apologize to her dignity with 3 oats and receive immediate forgiveness. The room accepts a little nonsense and returns calm in exchange. You move 2 at a time, sometimes 3. Too many and the air grows busy. Too few and the air grows vain. You keep the middle way because the middle way holds ladders and baskets and ordinary days together. At the door, new light makes barley the color of patience. Your palm looks older in it, which is a compliment. You open your hand wider and let kernels skip onto the plank that begins the bridge. The soot notch on the good rung shows itself like a wink from a sober uncle. You meet its humor with your own, just in the corner of your mouth, and step aside so the first hen can wonder herself forward. Feet test rung, then wood, then the idea of a way. A head peers over the ladder's edge, decides that nothing disastrous is happening, and calls this wisdom. 2 more follow, because wisdom makes excellent company when it sounds like grain. You keep the bridge free of crowding with the neat sweep of your knee, and the old trick of looking at a bossy hen's comb as if you admired it. Pride clears its throat and moves along. You save the oat's bright punctuation for the far stile. A kernel there, another a handspan into the stable, a third just below the ladder's first step. You do not lay a trail, you lay a suggestion. Suggestions make better memories. By the time the hen arrives where the straw begins, she has decided she meant to be there. Back and forth, your pockets grow lighter, the loft richer, with small opinions finding their new seats. The broody listens within her high-rim basket and permits the day to advertise itself. You offer her 1 barley kernel anyway, purely for politics. She eats it as if signing a treaty whose terms she wrote. You keep the last dozen kernels for the rooster who has yet to practice humility. You let him hear barley in your palm and see none in the other. His feet discover the bridge faster than his pride can rehearse speeches. At the loft, you spend the last 3 with ceremony. 1 for each fine tail feather that will look even finer higher up. He accepts and climbs his special rung as if the horizon had been tailored for him overnight. Your pockets now feel honest. You roll the linen scraps closed and tuck them back. Later you will refill them from the jar with the lid that never quite sits straight. For now, the sound you need is not in your pocket but in the loft. Soft claws arranging themselves, breath settling into unison. 1 contented throat practicing sleep. You stand a moment at the bridge and thank its plain grace by not thinking about it too hard. You smooth a smear of mud off the near stile with your sleeve because clean ideas often start at the edges. Then you run your palm once down your throat to remind your voice where it lives, low, even without fuss. You will need it again when water forgets how to be courteous and the birds remember how to be birds. You return to the coop to invite the last small committee that confuses suspicion with intelligence. Barley gives them the old lecture. Oats clap at the right times. Your voice does the rest. When the doorway empties, you lay 4 kernels on the sill, 1 at each corner. A little superstition in case the wind reads. The lintel pretends not to notice. Lintels are conservative. Above, the loft breath deepens. You hear the sound you wanted. Not silence, not chatter. The fabric sound of feathers at peace. You keep your hands still, because stillness is something creatures borrow. The day has folded itself into steadiness, crease by crease, and grain did most of the folding. A knock comes, not sharp, only patient, as if the wood should answer in its own time. You brush straw from your sleeve and open before the third tap. Your neighbor stands with rope coiled on his arm, loops tidy as loaves. His cap is damp at the brim. He does not enter. He leans on the day so the house keeps its temperature. You nod. He nods. The ropes say the rest. You take them with both hands. Flax remembers fields even when it becomes cord. It smells faintly of pond and summer. The coil slides across your palm without argument. He has brought 3 lengths, 1 long, 2 shorter, and a thin messenger line that behaves like a polite thought. Together you stand at the yard's edge and read the low places. The ditch by the gate wears a sheen, not a voice. The run along the nettles follows its purpose quietly. Clouds drag their sleeves along the horizon, but do not ring them. Not yet, you say. Soon enough, he says. Your tones agree. Prepare as if. The plan is plain. The long line will rest under the eaves and come down by the stable post. A high tether for crates if the yard becomes a pond. One short line will live at the ladder bridge, so a guiding hand can steady hens without touching them. The second short line will tie at the coop corner, ready to become a railing if pride falters. The messenger line is for people a quiet tug when someone wants a word without waking the house. You walk the lines with him, each of you taking an end, letting rope learn the path, over the peg, under the gutter stick, behind the post, around the rail, back to the peg. Not sit where they can be seen without bending. Tails are generous. Water loves to edit stingy ends. Where the line crosses the ladder style, you tie a loose half hitch, not to bind, only to remind a foot where the edge is when thoughts drift. You count softly as you snug the lay. He answers with his own numbers, a little out of time with yours, and the birds above settle to the rhythm. You tie a square where 2 lines meet flat and unambitious. The rope hums when you pluck it once, a low note of nettles and thrift. Between tasks you trade half sentences about weather. The sluice keeper walked the long ditch before dawn and found it respectful. The bell coughed once and then decided to think. His ducks have claimed the lane as family property. Ducks, you say, will vote for any water that rises. He laughs, a small, nose-only laugh. At the stable you measure the beam with your arms, and then with rope, which is the more honest measure. The long line passes over and back, then down to a cleat you made from a broken rake handle. The angle is good. A crate hung there will nod, not wander. He proves the cleat with a tug meant for a stubborn goat. It says nothing. You lay the messenger line along the wall and choose its bell. A wooden clapper on an old spoon handle. 2 knocks mean come when you please. 3 mean come now if able. After dusk, a lantern at the window repeats the message low for 2, high for 3. He shows you the notch in his staff that marks sensible water from bothersome thumb and a half, too. You show him the soot mark on the ladder rung that means step here without thinking. He will copy the trick if soot can be spared. Soot, you say, argues only with laundry, and laundry can be postponed in a wet week. Promises finish with proper rituals. A coil hung where sleepy hands can find it, another laid on the sill like a cat that pretends not to care. The last wound loosely around the ladder post where it can watch. You both look and do not admire. Admiring tools makes them vain. He offers a wedge of cheese from his pocket, wrapped in cloth, clean enough. You share, leaning elbows on the rail while rope considers its future. You taste sour, salt, and the faint barn sun that lives in good cheese. He swallows and says nothing further, because nothing further is needed. In the loft above, a hen discovers she has been moved and decides to be pleased about it. Before he goes, you agree on hours. At prime, one of you will walk the ditch and listen. At noon, the other will check the gate slats. At dusk, whoever hears the meadow first will hang a rag at the corner dark for quiet, light for rising. If night adds opinions, the spoon and clapper will carry them. You walk him to the ladder bridge so he can admire its modest argument with mud. He touches the near stile and says it feels sure-minded. You tell him of the stone under the far foot. He approves of stones that believe in work. He will lay a second plank on his side for the return way, not for chickens who ignore generosity, but for people who forget which hand is bread and which is knife when rain begins to talk. He steps onto the first rung and asks if you need a hand with the broody. You lift your palm in a sideways blessing she is at peace with her basket. He crosses, the rope tail tapping his coat like a small, sensible friend. At his gate, he raises the coil in a farewell that means whenever. You stand where he stood and let the yard explain itself again. Ropes now make gentle diagonals between the day's ideas. They are not fences. They are invitations to hold on if thoughts slip. The messenger line waits by the spoon. The short tie at the ladder looks pleased to have work. Above, feathers rustle as if agreeing to the contract. You touch the long line once, a finger's weight, and feel how it carries expectation without drama. Then you go to other chores, certain the water will find you ready if it lifts. You lift the first plank with both hands and feel the weight answer your bones in a familiar language. It is not heavy so much as opinionated. One end has a scar where a nail once pretended to be useful. The other end bows like a polite greeting. You carry it a few steps, scuff a flat place with your heel, and lay the board so it chooses ground that wishes to be chosen. The mud listens, innocent as a child who has just hidden a spoon behind its back. You set the second plank 3 shoe lengths beyond the first, close enough for comfort, far enough to make each step a decision. Your eye likes that distance. Your lungs approve of the pause it invites. The yard has become a small archipelago of wood in a sea the color of bread dough. You test the first plank with the center of your foot and let your ankle teach your head what balance means today. You move plank to plank like measured breaths. Step, settle, pause. Step, settle, pause. The mud waits below with perfect manners, patient for any hurried thought. You feel it consider your weight through the wood, a shy pressure that does not insist. You keep your gaze soft and low, not at your toes at the second board, where your next certainty will live. The air carries a gentle iron smell from nail heads and damp hinges. Behind you, the stable offers a breath warm with animals who believe walls are enough. In front, the yard stretches toward the gate, rutted where wheels rehearsed spring before spring arrived. You angle the third plank to meet a puddle that thinks it is a pond. Puddles are ambitious in wet weeks. They like titles. You speak to the boards the way one speaks to stubborn relatives, with respect and without questions. A palm tests a corner. A heel persuades a lip to lie flatter. A small chip under an edge makes a shy piece brave. You take the fourth plank from its stack, old gray made handsome by work, and run it along the others so the yard becomes a sentence with careful commas. You prefer commas. Your clogs hang from your belt by their straps. Wooden mouths open to the day. Socks are safer here. Wood on wet wood tells jokes you do not want to hear. Later, when the stretch is truer and ash has given the rung some grit, you will let the clogs speak again. For now, quiet feet. The first stretch carries you over the soupy places between house and coop. You look down into the brown mirror and see nothing of yourself, only a hunched piece of sky where the wind rehearses lines. Reeds along the ditch lean in like gossiping ants. They approve of your prudence. Reeds love prudence. It keeps them in work. A burst of very small bubbles arrives near the second board, where old straw turns itself into memory. You watch them pop, modest and neat, and put one more plank past the place. A kindness you would like someone to show you if you were the ground. Each board becomes not just a step but a promise. This far you can go without thinking about your knees. You keep your arms loose, letting your hands float at your sides like open questions. When you balance with your shoulders, your feet become emphatic. When you balance with your breath, your feet write better sentences. You prefer their penmanship tidy. Halfway to the gate, you lift a board from the back of your road and carry it to the front, a small ferry becoming a bridge. You do not rush it. The mud beneath the lifted end sighs with relief and closes the brief wound without complaint. You set the board ahead and tap it once with your knuckles. It answers in the tone you like, low, wooden, uninterested in drama. The ladder bridge watches from the side with teacherly approval. It despises swagger and rewards repetition. You let your steps echo what it asked of you earlier. Trust the rung, wait for the settle. Move when the moment says now. Yard and ladder agree. You are a quiet instrument between them. A hen calls once from the loft as if to say she has remembered a very important grain. The sound does not reach your feet. Your feet are busy counting boards. The neighbor's ducks shout a legal opinion about the lane. Ducks admire water the way some people admire their own handwriting, loudly and at every opportunity. At a dip near the gatepost, the first board shows a mean inclination to tilt. You kneel, pinch ash from your pocket, and dust the plank where wooden grain feels too eager to slide. The ash darkens and then disappears, leaving a roughened memory your sock will thank later. You wedge a sliver under the sinking corner. It settles like a child that has been offered the right lap. You gather the next plank and set it slightly skew, a quiet diagonal that turns a stretch into a dance step. The diagonal forgives sloppy thoughts. The mud below wears a thin film, oil and sky, and yesterday's soup of footprints. You read in it your own earlier crossing and the neighbor's staff tip, neat as a clerk's dot. You like when the world keeps its minutes. As you come near the gate, the ground lifts, less water, more stubborn clay. You lay the last plank anyway, a courtesy to return feet. You try the latch and feel the wood swell and ease, a living hinge that has learned enough years to be mostly sensible. The lane beyond is a modest river of its own, stones practicing how to be islands. The ditch murmurs a long story you will fetch later. You turn and walk back along your small causeway. Everything is easier in this direction because the house is a promise that keeps itself. The boards hold the way they did a moment ago. Faith is circular like that. You step, settle, pause. A little water climbs the side of your second board, and then thinks better of ambition. You admire the mind that knows its edge. At the worst rut you squat, and use your fingers to persuade a channel to become a path. Two dribbles agree to meet and go under the plank instead of over it. You smile for the pleasure of moving a river with the least possible arrogance. The river does not notice, which is the correct amount of gratitude for such work. Back at the stack, you lift the last spare board and lay it down. Not because you need it, but because future you always says thank you when present. You does the simple extra thing. The line of planks now reads across the yard in a grammar of thrift. You stand a moment and let your body memorize it. Memory saves time later, and time is what makes calm feel earned. You walk the new path one more time with a deliberate boredom that keeps ankles honest. Nothing changes, which is the best report. Mud remains patient. Boards remain literal. The house door leans with the damp, then straightens. The loft says little. The day grows one shade lighter, pewter, giving up its sulk. On the final step, you allow yourself a single thought shaped like pride, and then trim it down to fit your pocket. Pride trips as easily as boots. You carry modesty instead. It weighs less and does not stain. You stand in the stable doorway and let the loft breathe at you. Warm straw, clean wood, a pepper of feather. The ladder mouth waits like a small hill. Above, two crates nod on their tethers, boats that have reached a friendly harbor. The hens have settled enough to be counted, but not enough to pretend they invented calm. This is the hour for bars instead of baskets, stillness instead of drifting. You climb with hands on rails and breath level. Straw hushes underfoot, patient as old linen. At the roosting wall, the two bars wait like a tidy choir. Upper for elders and dignitaries, lower for talkers and the easily impressed. You press the wood with the heel of your hand. It springs as comfort should know wobble, no pride. You greet the first hen with a palm under breastbone and a second palm across folded wings. The usher's hold that means dignity will be escorted, not hurried. She lifts, a warm loaf of breath, heart tapping the side of your thumb. On the up, per bar you give her a beat to think. Claws pat once, then close, left, then right. Her head rocks twice, and she becomes a quiet ornament. Beside her, you leave a fist of empty sky before you fetch the next. Hens like enough room to disagree without stepping on a sentence. The second settles as if the idea had been hers all along. You let her keep the fiction. The third performs a small waltz of toes and neck. You turn with her so the world stays the same size. The bar takes her, keeps her, and she forgets there was ever ground. You work the line with a broom's rhythm lift. Set, wait, lift, set, wait. Between birds, you nudge a ridge of straw so late feet will find honesty instead of surprise. Dust climbs in a thin incense. The broody remains in her high-rim basket, monarch of a circular realm. Queens travel badly. You leave her throne intact and bow to the law of eggs. At the lower bar, the talkers gather the ones who believe that news improves by speaking it twice. You place them with small adjustments of a forefinger. Here, an inch to break a glare. There, a nudge to end a grievance no one can remember beginning. The wood begins to polish under their toes. You notice which beak prefers the left, which comb admires the wall, which soul believes in corners. The rooster receives ceremony. Pride keeps him alert. Altitude keeps pride civil. You lift him from his temporary rung and show him the horizon of beams and thatch. He files a silent report on windows and drafts. You set him on the dignified notch you prepared a little apart, still in sight. His tale settles into an opinion that requires no speech. The half-grown chatterers wait in the crate like a small parliament after lunch. For them, you choose the lower bars near corner, boxed by two walls. Corners teach manners cheaply. You carry each bird, letting toes learn the rule twice, first by feel, then by the neighbor who will not budge. Where two fidget together, you offer one barley kernel, not a bribe, a period. Periods end sentences. Ended sentences allow naps. You recheck the tether lines. Now empty of responsibility, they hum lightly in the draft, not sitting like plain buttons honest, not decorative. You leave the crates to bob an inch, reassuring any late mind that boats are still available if courage wobbles. One hen on the upper bar has discovered oratory. You do not meet her eye. You stand near enough that your sleeve becomes her horizon. The speech dissolves at once. You step away, and the silence remains. You run your palm along both bars, not to pet but to listen. Wood answers with small sounds settle, hush, breathe, that tell you the spans have found their honesty. At the latter mouth you rake straw into a shallow crescent, a moon to cradle timid toes. Near the wall you set a low tray of grit. Not so near it invites foolishness. Latecomers can arrive without wings losing face. Breath rises until it touches the thatch and spreads like a warm shawl. You thumb the shutter open a finger, enough to keep the air from growing opinions. A lean of wind tries the room, finds nothing to argue with, and goes elsewhere. You count heads, because counting is a lullaby that does not need tune. The number matches the morning's count, minus the queen. A last doubtful hen remains in the crate, certain that suspicion is intelligence. You speak barley with thumb and fingers, a dry, polite cluck, and your hands draw the old road in the air. She remembers the road. On the bar, she finds the space you left like a letter folded under a plate. Her toes close around the word enough. You step back until your calves find the crate lip, and the whole scene becomes a slow parliament. Heads tucked, heads level, heads gently rocking toward that small rehearsal of sleep before the real thing. The loft is a city now streets named Balance and Quiet and Bother No One. Before you descend, you press a finger into the straw near the wall. Dry to the knuckle. The boards keep their counsel. You let your hand rest on the up, per bar a moment, confirming promises with skin. No wobble, no surprise. You back down the ladder one step at a time so the birds see you growing smaller rather than vanishing. Disappearing invites curiosity. Diminishing invites sleep. At the stable floor, you listen once more. Feather, straw, wood. Your own breath, the sounds agree on a slower beat and decide to keep it. You answer by coiling a rope tail, smoothing a corner of straw, stroking the post as if it too had done brave work. The loft holds steady on its quiet tide. You let the hour end without comment. You stand before the stable door and consider it like a friend who sometimes forgets its promises. The boards have swelled a courteous hair with the morning damp. The lower edge wears a necklace of old splash and new patience. You put your palm flat on the plank and feel the way wet walks into wood, slow, stubborn, sure. Doors are only fences that learn to move. Today you ask this one to be a fence again, politely. The peg jar waits on the sill, a crowd of small decisions carved from leftover oak and ash. You choose 3 by feel, one fat, one honest, one opinionated. Each bears a shallow knife mark so you remember which hole used to like which peg. You lift the latch not to open, only to loosen the door's temper and test the jam. The top mortise accepts the first peg with a satisfied throat clear. 2 taps with the heel of your hand, and it seats home, grain to grain, as if remembering last winter's cold. At the middle, you try the honest peg. It hesitates, then decides to belong. You do not hurry the last. The opinionated peg prefers a new angle, so you shave a whisper from its hip with the back of your knife. The curl falls like a golden ear and sticks to your sleeve. Now the peg slides, balks once for dignity, and then submits. All 3 stand in a tidy line, little soldiers preventing mischief from drafting under the plank. You fetch the flax cord from its nail a good length. Not new, not tired. It smells of ponds and sun. You rub it once between your palms until warmth wakes its obedience. The loop on the latch bar takes the first turn easily. Over, under, back through the square knot, sits without vanity. You run the cord across to the jam hook, through the eye, and back again so the bar cannot forget its job when the wind practices opinions. You consider the draft line at the sill. A gap admits not only air, but conversations best held outdoors. You kneel and press your thumb to the seam where board meets stone. The cold there is a small clerk, accurate and unnecessary. From the basket, you take a snake of old sacking stuffed with chaff and a spoon of ash. You lay the snake along the sill and dab ash where straw shows its boldness, sealing the small leaks that turn rooms into weather. The snake is ugly as virtue and twice as useful. At the hinge you touch each pin and then each strap, a ritual of gratitude for iron that remembers its manners. A smear of tallow speaks quietly along the joint, enough to discourage squeaks without inviting dust to build a nest. The upper hinge sighs once, relieved to be understood. You lift your eyebrows at the door. The door pretends not to notice your humor. Shutters next. The coup's little mouth opens on leather hinges you cut from an old shoe. The leather accepts your fingers like something that used to be alive and still approves of usefulness. You push the pin through the outer hasp and twist the home-carved clevis so it sits flat. For the draft that slid through in last week's rain, you press a slim wedge into the inner frame. The wedge makes a patient argument the wind cannot refute. You tie a courtesy leash from shutter to post one loose bow that says, "Should a gust try comedy?" The joke ends early. Your grandmother's knot lives in your hands. 2 loops, a turn, a tuck. It looks like indifference and behaves like law. You test the bow with a neat tug. It releases the way breathing releases. That is the whole point of bows. Back to the big door. You thread a secondary fiber thinner line, friendlier voice, through a pair of small holes drilled in the plank last winter. Inside, the line knots around a peg. Outside, it makes a simple loop you can lift with 2 fingers, even when carrying a basket or a mood. Latch strings solve the problem that thumbs sometimes have. You tie the loop just low enough that a child could mind it, and just high enough that a goat would remain ignorant. Goats do not need more ideas. The threshold complains where swollen wood rubs stone. You do not argue. You take the draw knife to the least necessary edge and shave one careful prayer the length of your hand. The shaving curls like butter. The door swings and calls you a sensible person without using words. You allow yourself the smallest pride and then fold it away, because pride, like a wet cloak, gets heavy when you keep it on indoors. You fetch a handful of dried moss and work it into the seam, where wall and frame shook hands badly when the house was young. Moss forgives a lot, asks little, and smells of patient shade. You press it with the flat of your thumb and persuade it to believe in corners. A wash of thin clay follows from the pot near the hearth, just enough to paint the moss and turn it into remembered earth. The seam goes quiet. At the back door you repeat yourself, because repetition is the spelling of survival. Pegs, cord, latch, sill, hinge. You hang a short stick from the inner bar with a bit of twine. When the wind thinks to lift the door, the stick taps the plank like a modest bell and tells you the back has begun to dream. You prefer doors that sleep on schedule. You step outside and look at your work from the day's side. The cords write neat diagonals over wood like lines in a practiced hand. Pegs show their blunt heads, unhandsome and dependable. The sack snake lounges along the threshold with the sinless vanity of a useful thing. A strand of flax catches a drop of light and turns it into a reminder that simple is not the same as careless. The loft hums approval in feather syllables. You can leave them and trust your knots, which is all a morning really asks. You give each cord a last tug the way a mother gives each child a last tuck more for you than for them. Then you coil the leftover line and hang it in the doorway shadow, where it will not invite rain to think of ladders. A gust rounds the stable corner and tests your conclusions. The door moves a finger, then none. The bar keeps its sermon. The pegs keep their eloquent silence. You nod. The wind appears to shrug and goes elsewhere to scold someone who forgot pegs. You close your fist around the knife again and take 2 breaths while counting the doors you have tamed today: front, coop, stable, back. 4 is a good number for weather. You put the knife away. The day has more to say, but the doors have said what you needed. No drama, only duty. You go to the byre and consider the long wooden trough, the way one considers an old bench that has learned both patience and bad habits. It squats along the wall where cows have explained their needs for years, its lips shiny with tongues in time. Today, the floor will try to borrow the grain. Today, you will teach the trough to keep itself a little higher than greed. The forked pole waits behind the door, leaning like a pilgrim who knows which shrine matters. Its crotch is smooth where your palm has taught it to be reasonable. Its foot wears a blunt point that knows how to argue with clay without raising its voice. You carry it in with the ceremony due to plain saints, and set the fork under the trough's lip. Wood meets wood with a dull, neighborly sound. You do not heave. You breathe first, then lift with that slow insistence that wins more arguments than pride. The trough sighs. The lip climbs the width of a thumb, then 2. You rock the pole a patient hair, notched cradle under rim, and the weight settles on the fork as a tired man chooses a chair he's trusted in every season. A brick waits under the bench, the kind that has served as doorstop, corner shim, and emergency thought. You fetch it with your toes, a tidy shuffle that keeps your hands free. Slide it under the first leg. Good. Another brick for the second. The trough takes to altitude slowly, like a cautious hen trying stairs. You keep the pole snug under the lip until the bricks believe in their new career. You test the angle with your palm, too proud, and the mash sulks to one end. Too humble, and the floor licks. You choose a modest tilt that keeps the center dry and grants each mouth a fair turn. Your hand stays under the wood as you listen. No groan. Only the soft talk strong things have when they agree not to be exciting. Along the back edge, where the trough flirts with the wall, a bead of damp has written small history. You slice a twig wedge from willow and slip it where board kisses board. The damp forgets to travel. You approve of wedges. They are what patience looks like when it wears shoes. Mash waits by the hearth coarse meal with a little warm water. You stir it with the wooden ladle, not to make it lovely, only to teach it one mind. The cows lean their heads without promising anything. Promises cost cud, and cud is scheduled. Before you pour, you run your hand along the lip again, and then along the pole. Feeling for the scratch that means a splinter dreams of greatness. A quick scrape with the back of your knife turns greatness back into good behavior. You rub the place with a smear of tallow so tongues will meet kindness instead of ideas. You brush grit from the bricks as if from a guest's sleeve. Now, the pour. You do it like rain that means well. Steady, even, uninterested in applause. The mash spreads into a shallow river that has already learned its banks. No flood, no slump, just an obedient tide. You keep the middle high enough that a stray wave cannot go shopping in the floor. A muzzle breathes a fog onto your sleeve. You answer with a word that is not a word and smooth a forehead the way one smooths a page. The forked pole is not finished. You bring it to the far end, lift again, and slide a narrow board under the third leg old shutterwood, the right width to teach level, a fourth support for the last corner. Not as high, the trough should keep its quiet slope. You stand back. It looks like a sensible table that decided to be a boat. You look along the planks you laid earlier. The new height makes a tiny harbor out of the byre. Dry straw here, dry lip there. The small water kept outside with good manners. At the threshold, the sack snake minds its post. You nod as if to a clerk who balances a ledger without sighing. Along the rim you tie a string with a single knot at the height you chose. Tomorrow, you will know if today's mind was wise. Beneath the lip, you loop a spare line if the yard decides to be a shallow lake. A tether to the beam will keep the whole arrangement from daydreaming. You rehearse the knot twice, eyes closed, until your hands report they can do it in the wind. The cows begin the slow work of approval. One tongue tests the new geography, finds it considerate, and writes a green line of praise along the rim. Another exhales and leaves a polite damp signature on your sleeve. You take both compliments as the payment they are. The pole comes away by degrees. The trough keeps its height, content on its little family of bricks and boards. You set the pole in its corner. It stands like a quiet uncle at a christening, full of more stories than it will ever tell. If the day asks for more height, the pole will audition again. If not, it will watch you pass with a look that says a tool is happiest when it can remain simple. You leave the byre door on its peg and listen. Drip from the eave, reed whisper, the spoon bell at the neighbor's line asking nothing yet. You think of all the things you have asked to be a hand's breadth higher today: birds, baskets, boards, now the trough, and feel the way your ribs answer with a taller breath. Sometimes safety is only that. A thumb more sky between worry and the thing it wants. You go to the stack of reeds you leaned yesterday against the byre wall. A tall, patient bundle the color of old straw hats. The stalks have drunk the night and become willing. You pull a fist from the sheaf and feel how the outer skin slides under your palm, not fresh cut, not brittle. Exactly the mood you like for work that should listen rather than argue. On the ground you lay a length of flax cord to be the spine, rubbing it between your palms until it warms to obedience. You anchor one end with your knee and set 3 reeds across it, their tips aligned like fingers pointing toward calm. Over, under, over, you begin the small grammar of weaving. The kind of sentence a day can say while thinking of other things. Your hands remember the width you want. A pad no wider than a forearm, no longer than the space where drafts invent opinions. Reed joins reed, each one a hollow promise. The first course sits flat. The second makes a shy hill and settles when you press it with the heel of your hand. Damp makes manners. Dry makes splinters. The work finds its tempo. Over, under, snug. Your breath keeps time with the cord's faint hiss against the reed's shine. A hen murmurs in the loft, and the sound lays itself along your rhythm, as if feathers approve of floor things getting wiser. At the edges, you coax a clean selvage with a thumb and a spare withe. Every few courses you tuck a sturdy rod lengthwise to stiffen the middle, a spine for a mat that will live low and be stepped on without complaint. When a stub stands too proud for its place, the back of your knife turns ambition into good behavior. You work near the threshold where the light is honest. Reed shows freckles and old river stains. Cord shows where it thinks of thinning. When the bundle in your lap lightens, you gather 3 more stalks, strip their feathery tops, and join them with a neat lay-in, so the mat eats new length without a hump. Halfway, you dip the edge in the bucket, a quick shake, and back to the bench. The reeds, pleased, behave like cloth. Twice you pause to knock chaff from your cuffs. The yard answers with the quiet of a day that will not startle anyone. When the mat reaches the length your eye measured, you finish the far end with a binding of split reed twisted on itself, a pale rope that works hard. You tuck its tail beneath the last course, snug it with the awl's gentle insistence, and smooth the edge until it stops remembering it was ever several pieces. Along one corner, you stitch a small loop from leftover cord, a handle for hauling and for hanging if the mat suns itself later. You lift the pad and flex it. It bows without pouting, then lies flat again, remembering duty. Your palms smell of pond and late summer. The knife, the awl, the bucket, the cord sit nearby with the humility of things that have seen their point worn out. Inside, the corner you have in mind waits like a drafty thought. Between post and wall where the wind writes practice letters under the sill, you press your hand to the floor and feel the chill speak through a narrow seam. A place like this can teach small feet to forget courage. The mat will make a different lesson. Here is dry, here is soft, here is where the day keeps its temper. You slide the pad into the gap's shadow. Long side to wall, short side snug to the post. Reed kisses stone with that papery sound that means agreement. You lean your weight on it, not scolding, only convincing, and the mat declares its intention to stay. Along the top edge, you set 2 small pegs into the seam, Not through the reed, just enough to say no to wandering. Your knuckles drum the surface. It answers with a dull, friendly thud. A narrower braid you made last winter, rush twined with reed, goes before the coop's little mouth, where claws step out thinking the world is a question. Laid there, it teaches yes without speeches. Beside it, you set a shallow tray of grit, so dust-bathing hopes will have a decent place when weather forgets itself again. The air near the floor changes the way a room changes when somebody sensible sits down. The draft that used to lick ankles becomes a rumor. The smell of damp lifts one finger and puts its hand down. Above, the broody shifts once, decides to approve on principle, and returns to practicing stillness. You let your own shoulders learn from her down, then settle. You twist the leftover lengths into a short cord and hang it by the door. Later, when the mat asks for a new tie, or the coop wants a fresh latch, you won't have to fetch patience from the beginning. A little basket of scraps becomes a future mat's first paragraph. You like when tomorrow can borrow from today without paying interest. Because you are thorough, you walk the room and listen for other corners with unruly air. One answers under the grain bin. For that you roll a thin snake of straw and bind it with a reed collar, tucking it where a full mat would be too proud. Another whispers near the back step. You promise it a pad when the next bundle is tamed. When you are done, you sweep reed crumbs into your palm and carry them outside for the hen who believes she deserves tips. She pecks once to make you feel important and then ignores you. You wash your hands in the bucket, not for cleanliness or virtue, only to feel the day cool your fingers and tell you the work is finished. You give your hands nothing to do so your ears can earn their keep. The yard is arranged for higher, drier, calmer. Now the world may speak without you interrupting it. You lean the broom against the post as if it too needs to listen. Sound travels differently when the earth is wet longer, rounder, as though the air has been softened in a pot. You stand with your shoulder to the stable and let the day pour into one ear and out the other, keeping what is useful on its way through. A cart rattles far off, a spoon against a poor bowl. A cow turns a chain into a small sermon. Somewhere, a hen remembers a thought and declines to share it. These are the beads on the string. You wait for the metal one. It comes, almost not there, one soft bell note flattened by distance and damp. The sound lifts like a shy bird and sits on the eave above you until your ribs notice it. Then it goes away as if it would rather not cause talk. You count to the number you keep for such messages, 1 to 8, never sentimental about 9. If the next stroke arrives before your breath returns to unremarkable, you mark it as near. If it takes the length of tying a bow, you mark it as far. You prefer this arithmetic to anyone else's opinion. The second note arrives on the breath after 4. Laneford, you tell the sleeve of your cloak, which is the only listener that never argues. Wind edits bells fiercely. A west puff makes sound fatter and untrue. A north slip thins it, like a priest with a cold. You tilt your chin to take the next stroke on a cheekbone and not a forehead, a test you invented when you were young and full of useful nonsense. The third note lands cooler, almost polite. You place it at the ditch turn, where willow keeps its feet in the stream, and its mouth in everyone's business. Sensible people and water both prefer edges. You do not stare at the belfry as if I could fetch sound faster. You stare at the ground, which already knows what water is thinking. Between the boards, a little thread of brown interests itself in direction. It points not at your clogs, which would be rude, but toward the far post, which is acceptable. You approve of water with manners. The fourth note arrives half a breath late and draped in reed whisper. That means the watchman is walking while he rings, a habit some men grow when they have known a winter too well. You adjust your sums. Walking bells are like walking thoughts, less accurate, more honest. You let this one be a mile, and no more, and plant it in your map behind the eyes. The map that has no colors, only times. A pause lengthens. The pause is the thread the notes are strung on. Without it, you would own only noise. During the pause, you look at the line you and your neighbor hung under the eaves. It writes the yard with a soft, sensible diagonal. If it had a mouth, it would yawn. 1 tug, and he will come. 3, and he will come quicker. None, and he will finish his cheese. Bells and lines and pegs, the parish's poetry is not ambitious. Faintly, another tower answers higher voice. Thinner rope. a parsonage yard, where the geese are too opinionated for their size. This is not your bell, but you let it join the sum because water does not honor fences. 2 strokes close, a third with a wobble, and then silence, like someone deciding on a hat. A sluice is being minded somewhere it should be minded. You waste no worry on sound that says competence. You go on counting when there is no bell. You count other things, the drips that find the same reed again and again, the small bubble that rises like a thought that has made up its mind, the space between the spoon clapper on the neighbor's line and its answer at the sill. Between every 2 counts, you breathe, which is an old skill that hides its cleverness. You move half a step so the stable wall becomes a listening board. Wood is a better ear than flesh. It collects the bell's tired echo and returns it to you rounder and patient, the way grandmothers repeat news. Now the strokes arrive in pairs with a neat gap. Pairs mean watch, not run. You accept the command because it is the kind you prefer from anyone. Accurate, unexcited, cheap. You think of the ladder bridge, the planks, the crates, the lines, every piece of wood that will ask water to mind its temper. If the bell's pairs become 3s, you will put another peg under the far stile and a second leash on the nursery crate. If they become 4s, you will tie the coop door back against its frame so no gust can invent a new hinge. Bells are only voices for chores you were going to do anyway. A gust fetches a different flavor of metal duller, as if wrung with a mitten. That will be the dye brew pot in the weaver's yard, the neighbor's favorite excuse for a bell, when the sexton keeps difficult hours. You do not put it on your map. You reserve maps for people who look at the low sky before they make sounds with iron. The ducks take this moment to make a proposal to the lane. Their proposal is unprintable, but brief. 2 more strokes come honest down the ditch like small boys who have washed their hands. Your shoulders let 1 inch go. Not today, then. Not the kind with boats or cots on beams, or the smell of old earth chewing new holes. You do not smile. You reduce the number of thoughts in your head by 1, which is better. Because listening is also for neighbors, you turn your ear toward the house. If anyone inside grows inventive because calm is a dull puppet show, you will hear it first as a hinge that thinks too loudly, or a foot that forgets what straw is for. Nothing argues. The house has accepted your earlier sermon about pegs. The loft above gives the slow tide sound of birds roosting and then forgetting they have bones. You learn from them. A last late note from the bell slants through a rib of blue-gray light, thin as a sewing needle and just as useful. You give it the honor of being the last. You do not wait for it to decide that it was only next to last. Bells, like ducks, like to have the last word. You give it to them because it costs nothing and keeps peace cheap. You pick up the broom again, but you do not sweep. You hold it as a marker in a book you are not finished with. You make a small copy of the bell inside your head, not the note, the pattern. 2. Still water. 3. Watch the ford. 4. Rouse the neighbor. 5. Pull what can float. You do not know if any parish clerk has written it so. Parish clerks write for the bishop. You write for the room and the field and the small lives who do not read. Before you move, you thank the wind with a nod for carrying the news at the right speed. News should arrive at the gate of a careful person, not a boy late to choir. You hang the broom back on its nail and feel the day resume its ordinary breathing, a little deeper, as if the yard has exhaled into its own pocket. Then you go to see if the puddle near the second plank has grown the width of a finger or only the height of a thought. Both measurements matter. Your feet return to their errands. Your ears keep the map rolled and tied. Ready enough. You take the high-rim basket down as if it were already full of sleep. Willow answers your hands with a quiet, papery kindness. The handle remembers where your fingers prefer to live. You set the basket on the straw you laid earlier and let it learn the room before you ask it to work. Baskets do better when they are treated as rooms, not tools. You fetch straw from the sweet corner where it held sun the longest. You do not scoop. You comb with your fingers, feeling for the temper that bends without breaking. The stems make a soft hiss like bees behind a wall. You twist a shallow ring, a crown for eggs, no higher than your thumb, and set it into the belly of the basket so round things will remember where round belongs. The ring holds its shape because you believe it will. Straw understands belief the way bread understands heat. A pinch of dried juniper and one of thyme go into your palm, crushed until the air remembers winter kitchens in better weather. You sift the crumbs into the straw, not to cook a hen, only to give clean smell to a close place. If a flea has ideas, it can take them outside. You lay 2 feathers from the quietest hen across the crown, as if writing a blessing that birds can read. You consider the curtain next old sacking, with a hem neat enough to flatter a duchess, as long as the duchess is sensible, and tie it to the rim, so it can drape without sulking. A curtain makes a basket into a thought. Inside is still, outside can wait. From the corner you bring the smooth river stone you keep for days like this. It is round as the heel of your hand, warmed on the hearth earlier to the shy temperature of a living thing. You set it under the straw crown for a moment, so the nest learns the idea of warmth before the eggs arrive. Hens notice ideas. They do not discuss them, but they notice. The broody watches you from her temporary perch, eyes narrowed, beak quiet. Queens do not chatter. You talk barley in your throat, the polite, dry murmur she respects, and show her your empty palms as if to say, all this is for your stubbornness. You lift her with both hands, one under the engine of her body, one across the wings where ambition hides. She is heavier than vanity and lighter than work. Her heat passes into your skin. Your skin says yes. Eggs next, one by one, lifted from the old nest and placed in the crown as if setting moons into a small sky. You do not count aloud. Counting aloud makes numbers nervous. You give each oval a slight turn with 2 fingers, the way you would turn a sentence to see if it makes the same sense from the other side. The warm stone slides to the edge of the crown, now a quiet neighbor, not a boast. A smooth wooden teller rounder than it pretends joins the real eggs at the rim to calm the arithmetic in a broody's head. Some sums are helped by a durable 0. You invite the queen to sit with a slow lowering of your hands and the old procession of a thumb across breastbone, then a hush across the back so wings do not remember they are flags. She settles, a tide deciding on a shore. You tuck the curtain until only the neat end of her comb shows and the unblinking gem of one eye. The eye says, we will allow this. The body says it has already begun. You anchor the basket the way you anchor arguments with modesty and enough rope. The first leash loops the rim and ties to the beam above, slack enough to permit a nod, short enough to forbid travel. A second line runs through the willow ribs and around the post, so the basket cannot fetch an opinion about the ladder, not sit where your hands can reach them in the dark. You smooth the tail ends with a thumb. Rope likes to be thanked. Water and mash must come with dignity. You set a shallow clay dish within pecking reach. Not so near it invites a mess, and a small measure of warm mash in a low bowl that will not brag about its depth. You show both to her with the courtesy of a waiter who knows the house. She pretends indifference until your hand leaves. Then she eats with the economy of a queen who never wastes appetite. You admire restraint in creatures who do not read sermons. Outside the basket, you tidy the floor as if company were expected. A ring of fresh straw holds the little world snug. A short reed mat lies beneath the basket, so drafts become merely stories told elsewhere. Above, the shutter is a finger open. Broodies like air that behaves without calling attention to itself. You listen once, with your cheek near the rim breath steady. No fret, a small dry cluck when a toe meets the crown and approves. You plan the routine, as if it were a hymn. At prime, offer water. At noon, lift the curtain 2 fingers. At dusk, let her choose 1 minute on her feet, if she argues kindly. Some hens will not. You respect zeal when it is useful, and trim it when it is foolish. If the river misbehaves and the yard becomes a shallow sky, the basket will float a hand's breadth and then kiss its leash, nodding like a boat that knows a harbor. You will not be heroic. You will be timely. For insurance, you stitch a small cross width through 2 ribs at the back to make a shelf for your palm, if you must carry her further. You practice the lift without her up from the floor, down on the ladder rung, up again to the next, so speed will not invent mistakes later. The soot-nicked rung waits like an old friend who has kept a seat. Because quiet loves order, you mark the basket's rim with your house mark, in chalk 2 lines and a curve and the day's sign. So tomorrow's, you will remember what today's you meant. You slide the teller to a new place and listen for her answer. None. That is the best kind. Confidence, not boredom. A thin rain tries the shutter, then gives up. In the hush that remains, you hear the business of brooding. Feathers reorganizing like librarians, eggs settling like arguments, breath stacking itself into a low wall against the world. You sit on the step and let the sound build its little town behind your ears. The yard, the ladder, the planks, the ropes, they are all citizens of this town now, paying their small taxes of steadiness so one foolishly brave creature can make more of her kind. Before you go, you lift the curtain an inch and tell her the old promise you have with small lives. Higher, drier, calmer. She blinks once and returns to measuring warmth with her breastbone. You lower the cloth, slip the last barley from your pocket into the dish because politics is real, and make the first mark on your routine with the confident laziness of someone who will, in fact, keep it. You open your cloak as if it were a small, patient room. The wool answers your fingers with stored warmth, a quiet weather of its own. On the straw at your feet, a scatter of chicks practices courage. In Crumb's legs, too new for judgment, voices too new for discretion. You kneel so the day becomes their size, and let your hands become 2 low hills. The nearest chick steps onto the slope of your palm and discovers that up is a direction it likes. You scoop without catching, gather without counting. Tiny hearts beat against your lifeline. Quick as rain on thatch, then slower, then trusting. Down your front you make a pocket where cloth curves and meets. The cloak becomes a valley with walls made of you. One by one, the small bodies slide into the valley and find the warm trough at its bottom. They knit themselves into a living braid and hush as if someone had shut a door on weather. You stand with care, knees first, then hips, then breath, and bring a hand to your throat to keep the cloak's lip from spilling spring. The chicks adjust, a soft rustling like a scribe turning thin pages. Their heat passes through linen and wool and settles the morning's small ache out of your bones. You walk the ladder as you would walk a lullaby step. Settle. Pause. The soot-marked rung greeting your foot with its known sentence. At the loft mouth, you lean your shoulder into the rail and let your cloak become geography again. A fingertip appears, then a beak, then an opinion. You slide a chick onto the straw island you made earlier, a warm, square country bordered by scents. The chick sinks until only fluff and thought remain, then invents the idea of preening and improves on it. The second follows, brave, now that the first has written the rule. The third attempts to turn its arrival into an opera. You close the cloak an inch, an opera becomes hum. Back down, you gather the last 2 late scholars who believe the corner warmer than any palace and carry them with a grain of ceremony. 1 hand for each. The cloak open a courteous finger, so they will not think themselves excluded from the better myth. All now sit together and invent a pile, a small living hearth that needs no tending. You place a low board around their perch on 3 sides to teach wandering a better story about later. On the 4th side, you lay your palm flat, and the sea of fluff accepts that a hand is as good as a wall. A dish of warm water sits within Beak's ambition, but beyond foolishness. You dip a fingertip and touch the rim twice. 2 beaks learn the lesson that bowls speak quietly but feed well. Beside it, a pinch of mashed yolk turns serious faces into serious eaters. A corner of your cloak has picked up 1 dot of yolk. You smear it thin and call that a badge. You will wear it until evening and pretend not to know. You pull the reed mat close to the chick's windward edge and set a small, smooth stone hearth warm, not bragging near their pile. They do not need it long, only enough for the notion of comfort to move from outside into the small furnace behind their breastbones. 1 chick tests a border and discovers your fingertip. Your fingertip yields, then returns, then yields again. It is a game that always ends in sleep. You retie the curtain on the broody's basket so her glance can approve without ruling. Queens like to observe succession. You let her see that the small, soft monarchs below conduct their kingdom with proper gravity. Eat, peep, nap, repeat. Your voice lives so low in your throat that even you forget to hear it. The chicks, however, lean toward it as plants lean toward light behind shutters. A draft tries the sill and finds the mat stubborn. You slip a wedge under the mat's corner, and the draft goes elsewhere to give opinions to door snakes. The loft smells of straw and the faint resin of juniper that still blesses the broody's nest. You make a note in your head. At noon, lift the stone. At dusk, Lower the board on the open side by a finger so adventure can rehearse under supervision. For now, the cloak has done its kind arithmetic, took chill from feather, gave heat from shoulder, carried not only bodies but a lesson. Higher, drier, calmer lives in wool as well as in wood. You fold the cloak's valley flat and stroke the crease with your knuckle, a thank you that cloth always understands. Downstairs, you hang it near the warm part of the wall, where damp cannot invent ideas, and wipe your hands on the same place you always wipe them, so the wall continues to think you are tidy. Before you leave, you count the pile by listening. 7 tiny snores braided into one sensible rope. Good rope. You put your ear close enough to feel the rope's warmth, and you borrow a strand of it for your ribs. Then back across the ladder, careful as always, because sleep deserves careful floors. Ducks discover you before you discover your plan for them. They come along the plank road like alder leaves with opinions, each step a comma in a sentence they believe they wrote. Ducks believe many things. Chief among them is that water is a relative who has brought cake. You meet them at the first board and bow, which is to say, you lower your hand to the height where reason lives, and you point that reason toward the lane. You open a narrow corridor with your boot, heel to toe along the right-hand planks, a clean edge between hen country and duck politics. The ducks try to vote anyway. You deny them the franchise with a broom held sideways, not touching, just drawing a new law in the air. They read it, argue briefly, and comply, because compliance makes more time for water. Your voice finds the sound that means, this way is faster to puddles. It is not a word. It is a door that opens in the throat. The leading drake, full of rank and very little else, turns his head so one eye can weigh your truth. He accepts your thesis provisionally and demonstrates leadership by going exactly where your boot points. The others demonstrate loyalty by nearly tripping over him. At the ladder bridge, you alter your posture so the ducks think the bridge is a long, shiny cousin of a log. You widen the soot-notched rung illusion by sweeping a reed bundle beneath. Ducks love a picture they can walk on. They take the first step with the cautious enthusiasm of people pretending not to be excited about a pastry. Halfway across, the drake stops to propose marriage to his reflection. Your broom, very gently, becomes a priest with no time for romance. The procession resumes. You keep hens in peace by pretending the ducks are clouds. Clouds drift where you suggest, if you suggest with enough patience. At the coop corner, a mallard hen decides the grain smell left over from your earlier lecture is actually a song written for her alone. You step between scent and sentiment and let your cloak be a curtain down, opera canceled. She resumes her life as a cloud. In the byre yard, you draw a soft bow with your boot and the broom, bending the duck road away from the stable door. The drake objects to geometry. You show him a puddle with better reflections, and he forgives mathematics. There is a moment when the line of ducks spills into a shallow sheet the yard has invented, and each one becomes a whispering ship. You watch to be sure no feathered ship decides to visit Chick Island by mistake. None do. The broom's law holds. At the lane, you face them toward the ditch, where water speaks their dialect without interruption. A short stick at the ditch's lip becomes your customs officer. 2 taps, and the first pair leaps, the rest following in the irresistible grammar of after. Once afloat, they become saints of their own church, and you let them preach. Ducks do not attend to human advice while testifying to water. You set 2 light hurdles hazelwithes you made last year along the plank edge, so the duck parish remembers which doors are closed today. The hens, above and indifferent, practice the virtuous art of ignoring neighbors. You admire this virtue because it is rare and uncomplicated. Your neighbor leans on the gate and contributes a sentence. They'll climb if they can see grain. You agree by adjusting not grain but the angle of a shadow. Your body blocks the only strip of light that made the loft look like a tavern. The world turns a degree toward sense. You thank him without words. He returns to being a fence post with opinions. On your way back, you sweep the wet boards with the broom's wrong end, so the water learns the habit of going away from hens. A thin stream obeys because thin streams are polite when spoken to early. At the ladder bridge, you leave a pinch of grit on the first 2 rungs. Duck feet smear honesty wherever they walk. You like the rungs honest. The ducks, having achieved a chorus in the ditch, begin to legislate splashing. you let them. A happy parliament keeps to its own house. One duck remembers she can fly and says so. You remember you cannot and do not answer. She lands exactly where she started, and everyone pretends it was a reasonable use of time. Back at the stable, you check the loft for offense. None. Hens are either a little sleepy or a lot polite. The broody lifts her eye, decrees that the duck's sermon is acceptable in moderate doses, and closes state again. The chicks twitch in their pile, dreaming of ladders that are really your hand. You lower your voice another notch, and the entire loft lowers with it. You finish by drawing a thin line of ash across the plank where duck feet most wish to argue. Ash settles debates wood did not know it was having. You hang the broom and say to it that some days its job is to be a fence you can move with one hand. It handles the compliment with composure. Pitch waits in the small pot you keep for weather that forgets to be courteous. It is the color of modest thunder and the smell of ship stories told by people who have never seen a sea. You set the pot on a brick near the hearth until it loosens its shoulders and remembers how to be kind. A sliver of tallow teaches it not to boast about stickiness. Tools behave better when flattered by a little fat. You bring the nursery crate to the threshold where light is square and honest. The willow ribs show a faint fray at two corners, a souvenir from last year's errands. You turn the crate and prop a corner on a wedge so gravity will hold the lesson you are about to give. With a thin stick, you draw a neat bead of pitch along the seam where slat kisses slat, not a wall, only a whisper. Then your thumb, wet with a smear of tallow, rounds the bead into a quiet knuckle. The corner suddenly looks as if it has always known the right answer. You work each foot the same way. Pitch bead, tallow thumb, a small pause so the air can agree, and then a test with a wet finger. If the finger sings a tacky note, you wait. If it slides like a thought that has chosen a better path, you proceed. Beneath each foot you press a square of old leather, nailed with two tiny copper pins your neighbor traded for eggs. Leather turns the crate's feet into diplomats. They speak softly to wet boards and are believed. You cut two slim skids from ash, plane their edges with the back of your knife, and bind them under the crate's belly with reed ties so the lattice sits on rails, not directly in puddle opinions. Rails want to go forward by nature. Even standing, they suggest sense. You like that in wood. For the lid, you stitch a short awning from a retired grain sack, folding a hem that will not wick trouble. Two eyelets take cord, without fraying. Tied to the rim, the awning becomes a brow over the chick's future, or the broody's court shade from cheeky drips and dignity against drafts. You rub the cloth with a breath of beeswax, so the first hour of rain will bead like beads, not plot like conspirators. Back to pitch. Along the inside corners you trace the thinnest seam, just enough to turn future splashes into future pearls. You do not seal the world. Birds need air more than opinions. You leave gaps where gaps behave like windows. You test the seam with the pad of your thumb and feel it firm like a promise you intend to keep. The little toggle beneath the wake you tied there yesterday earns its own minute. You wrap it in a kiss of pitch to smooth a snag that caught your sleeve, then dust it with ash so nobody will stick to virtue by accident. The lines that leash the crate to beam and post you inspect fussy as a parish clerk. Splice here renewed, fray there burned back, not seated, tail generous. You carry the crate outside and set it into the trial barrel. The pitch meets water and does not argue. The leather feet lie handsomely. The ash skids keep the belly an honest finger above worry. You push the crate until it thinks of wandering and the line forbids it kindly. A chick would feel only a dignified nod. You count a slow 8 while the surface writes its round letters. Then lift the crate and watch how quickly it forgets being wet. Quickly enough. You bring a second crate, the Queen's boat in emergencies, and repeat the sermon at a stricter key. Thicker pitch on the feet, longer skids, 2 extra holes under the rim to let water out if the world insists on being a fool. You hang a tiny slate from the side with your mark, and a mark for today's weather, so any helper who finds this boat knows who tied it, and when the tying, thought it knew something. The pot now holds a remnant that would make mischief if left. You feed it 2 reed scraps and a twist of flax, and make a small fire brick that you will break tomorrow to start a steadier blaze. Pitch likes to feel wanted. You give it an afterlife that will not smear hands. At the stable, you lift each crate to its place. Nursery boat to the low tether, queen's boat to the high. You test each line by leaning your weight into the crate exactly as far as worry would and then one hair less. The knots do not learn new words. Good. You lay the awning flat for fair hours, ready to flick forward if rain begins to pretend it is clever. You step back until the two crates become parts of the room, not news. The hens barely glance. The broody blinks once, taking note that the world has acquired more nouns. The smell of warm pitch fades into the smell of straw and animal. The room returns to what rooms prefer, being believed without being watched. Mash becomes kindness when it remembers warmth. You bring the pot to the hearth edge, where coals wear their modest crowns. The ladle stirs without ambition circle. Fold, rest, until steam rises like a homebred ghost and your palm at the pot's lip says, enough. Not hot, not chill. The tongue should think of comfort before it thinks of taste. You use the wooden measure with the smooth thumb dent. The one your grandmother taught you to fill shy of full so greed will never be the recipe. Into each dish, you pour a shallow lake that will not lap the rim when 5 beaks drink gossip at once. You touch the surface with 2 fingers, and then with the back of your wrist. The old tests flatter you by agreeing you still know. On the way to the loft, you set 2 bowls on the buyer step for the cows to consider, with their respectable indifference. They will approve later, long after approval matters. At the ladder, you shoulder the bowls, step, settle, pause, and watch the surface draw soft rings that teach you where your feet were clumsy. You try for fewer rings on the next step, and earn a nod from nobody at all, which is the best nod. In the loft, the smell of warm grain becomes a story the hens tell with their necks. Heads lift, beaks tilt, eyes bright as tallow. You place the bowls where the straw is thickest, and the floor remembers being honest. Not too near the roost bars, dignity needs its dry island. Not too near the ladder commotion breeds mistakes. Between where commons always live, you spread a pinch of grit into the corner dish, then a whisper of ash, just enough to remind feathers that bathing happens with dust, not with soup. The bowls receive their attenders in sensible order, elders first by habit, talkers next by volume, the shy by absence. You hold your ground with a knee and a polite hand so that greedy backsides keep to their own shadows. The rooster approaches as if mash were policy. You do not argue. You assign him a bowl end that can be watched by 3 hens at once. He eats as if examining a treaty, and the hens eat as if improving it. You believe in shared government. For the broody you mix a smaller dish, thicker, carried with 2 fingers and your breath. You lift the curtain an inch and slide the bowl into the appointed square of straw. Then the little dish of water that remembers warmth as well. She glances only once. Queens must pretend not to be fed. When you withdraw your hand, she eats with state, tiny, efficient, grateful only in the way absence of complaint is gratitude. Chick Island gets its own plan. You set a shallow shard of earthenware and spread a mash so thin it is almost a rumor. Then tap the rim twice with your fingernail. The pile trembles, then melts into individuals with assignments. A beak discovers the edge, another copies the discovery, a third collects the applause. When appetite threatens to drip, you tilt the shard to teach slope, and the drip decides to be a concept rather than a stain. Between the bowls, you walk with your palm open, offering no grain, offering only the shape of calm. The room watches your hand as if it were a small weather. Heat moves with it, and so does patience. 2 hens disagree briefly about a vowel. You stand where their voices meet, and the vowel decides to be pronounced tomorrow. When the bowls have become brown moons with craters, you scrape the rims with a reed spatula, so tomorrow will not begin with yesterday's conclusions. You set the reed to dry near the shutter's crack, where light writes polite lines. You lift each dish pause, let drips finish their sentences, then travel, and you set them in a neat row on the lower shelf so washing will be a ceremony, not a raid. You finish with a ladleful for yourself, because work that feeds everyone else should leave 1 spoon to tell your ribs they were invited. You lean against the post, feel the mash's shy heat, and let your breath become one more animal in the stable, slow, satisfied, unsurprised. Outside, rain plays its well-practiced measure on eave and barrel. Inside, beaks write their punctuation. Tap, tap, Pause. Tap. On the hearth, you rinse the pot with a palmful of hot water, swirled anti-clockwise, the way your grandmother said, removes not only grain but quarrels. You do not believe that, but the swirl is pretty and the pot is clean. You leave the last warm spoonful near the door for the cat who thinks it is a person. The cat will arrive late and declare the gift inevitable. You go to the gate, because gates tell the truth early. Posts stand there like two plain men who have known wet years and have nothing dramatic to say about them. You keep your hand on the left post, as if it were a wrist with a pulse. The wood is cool and minded. The grain lifts where last winter left its finger. At the base, where earth and timber become neighbors, the first thin brown edge has arrived, a careful tongue tasting the yard to see what might be learned. You crouch and let your knees report. Damp speaks through cloth into bone with the quiet patience of a clerk. You look where you always look, the low knot 2 thumbs above ground where you cut a little notch 3 springs ago. The nail head halfway up, that means the ditch has decided to be interesting. The faint gray ring where flood once wrote its rude signature, and you answered it with work. The water now sits between notch and nail, honest as a child who has not yet learned stories. It lifts the width of 1 barley kernel while you count to 60, and then settles as if reconsidering ambition. You approve of reconsideration. To the right, the lane ditch moves as a thoughtful snake. It carries straw, a reed tip, and somebody's opinion about last night's weather. You follow 1 pale straw with your eyes. It comes to the bend, hesitates as all travelers do at a corner, and then chooses the way toward the sluice field. The choice is correct. You nod, which is not for the straw but for yourself, to say this is still the hour for watching, not the hour for waking tools. You take the short staff with the notch your neighbor showed you, a thumb and a half too. You set it into the water with a slow hand so the surface will not scold and measure from mud to skin. Thumb into hair. The hair does not matter if it stays a hair. You mark it with a wet thumb on your own cuff. A fool's habit that works, because you always look at your cuffs when you are thinking. The wet mark will be gone by noon. By noon, you will not need it. A curd-colored bubble lifts near the post and breaks like a quiet thought. Further out, the skin trembles in rings when a hidden root remembers air. You measure the time between ripple and ring and give it a number you have used for years. The number is not written anywhere, only in the place behind your eyes where the map lives. Between each count, you breathe, the old way. In enough, out enough, no waste. You lean the broom against the gate and pick the little bits from the strap hinges. Reed seed, grit, 1 brave beetle who imagined the iron ashore. You leave the beetle a better shore on the post. Clean hinges tell you more. Creaking is only vanity. You tug the crossbar. It remarks on being wood, and then minds its business. Under the bar, where the lowest gap often invents mischief, you press the sack snake with your heel so it remembers its oath. A trickle thinks, then obeys, and runs along the ditch instead of reading under your door. Beyond the gate, in the lane, 2 stones show their backs like sleeping cattle. Water passes them with a courteous shoulder. You set a 3rd stone between them flatter, lower so the lane will learn to pour the way you prefer. You use your foot, not your hand, because feet understand the language of mud without growing theatrical. The streamlet approves and makes a neat decision. You listen for the bell and hear none. You listen for the spoon at the neighbor's line and hear none. You hear only the quiet arithmetic of water adding itself to itself. The arithmetic is not quick. You prefer slow sums. They are easier to correct with boards and patience. You go to the outer ditch and read the bank where eel traps sit like modest ideas. The traps wear a fringe of grass and a thin line of drift. You lift each by its mouth, spill nothing, and set them 2 fingers higher on their stakes. Eels have their business. You have yours. You make room for both. Back at the gate, you watch the color change. Early brown gives way to a lighter tea where the lane's trickle thins itself. You sniff for the iron taste. That means the ford upstream has been kicked open hard. None. You lift the post's foot with your eyes from stain to nail. It has climbed no higher. Your shoulder loosens a little on its own. Standing eases into listening again. You take a reed and lay it crosswise on the water at the post, then lay another reed along the flow. Where they kiss, you see the angle the day intends. It is not at your threshold. You accept the compliment and answer, By dragging your heel to deepen the little run you cut last year along the hedge. A tiny committeeman of water hurries to occupy the convenience. Small offices, well staffed, keep villages honest. A hen calls from the loft only the remark a hen makes when mash has become memory. The ducks preach to the ditch with the zeal of converts. You let their voices be measures. If the water steals their feet without their consent, it is time to think faster. It has not. Their feet remain theirs. Their opinions do not improve. You press your palm to the post once more and feel what your eyes have already told you. Chill, not cold. Push, not shove. You draw a wet line with a finger one barley above the water and tell yourself that if the skin rises to that line before sexed, you will pull another board from the stack and make the yard speak in drier grammar. If it rises half a nail by none, you will go see whether the sluice man needs a second voice. You appoint your tasks like saints' days in a calendar no one else will read. Before you go, you set a slip of straw in the latch crease. If the trickle thickens into nerve and tests the gate, the straw will travel your small, noiseless message to your later self. You straighten, breathe the smell of wet iron and willow, and let your ribs agree with the day. Not generous, not mean, only watchful. You hang the staff on its nail and carry your listening back into the yard so other chores can hear what the water said. You fetch the stable ladder the way you would fetch a bench for guests with important hats. It leans along the rafters already, but you want its rungs to think like balconies, not stairs. You wipe each rung with a sleeve to take the shy slick away one pass only, enough to make wood remember grip. A scrap of old sack ties around the third and fifth rungs, a modest carpet so toes won't slip, while pride makes speeches. You test the spacing with your hand flat. A hand and a half between rungs keeps tails from quarreling with beaks. The first rooster watches you with one eye, as if he were a magistrate, and you were about to petition. You answer with the hold that never offends, one palm along the keel under his weight, the other hand lying gently over folded wings. No squeezing. You carry him like a loaf you mean to admire in another room. His spurs remember last summer. Your forearm remembers how to be somewhere else. You lift his feet to the ladder until his toes meet the rung. Left first, then right. A polite handshake with wood. He leans forward, considers horizon, and becomes a small statue who believes it always had a balcony. The second rooster is certain balconies are common property. You arrange a curtain of sense by hanging a narrow sack from the next upright, a little wall that tells eyes they may rest. He comes up more calmly than his opinion suggested, steps onto the carpeted rung, and discovers he can own a view without owning the neighbor. You leave the space of a bowl between them, the universal unit of peace. You work in order, not in haste. Choose, lift, place, step down, breathe, step up again. Your feet keep the soot-notched rung for themselves, so the rhythm of you does not disturb the rhythm of them. When one bird insists on turning, you turn a little with him, so the world does not swing. The latter accepts more authority. Third bird on the higher rung, fourth below and 2 handspans away. Fifth on the rail end, where a wedge you set this morning keeps wobble out of philosophy. You smooth each comb with 2 fingers, not for vanity, for quiet. A finger's trace near the eye closes arguments that had been practicing. You lower the shutter to a patient smile, so light behaves like evening. Elevation and dusk together are the old medicine for boasting. The room accepts the prescription with a slow exhale. A bowl of barley meanly filled, on purpose, sits where necks must stretch a little to reach it. Stretching interrupts speeches. You place it just beyond the confident bird and just short of the ambitious one, so they discover moderation together. 1 peck, 2 pecks, then a pause that tastes like civility. You take the bowl away before anyone decides to write laws. You mind spurs with the respect due old tools. Seen, counted, ignored. A frayed cloth tied in a loose, ridiculous bow around the loudest tail persuades its owner to consult his feet rather than his neighbor's. He forgets to be grand and remembers to balance. You approve of bows that make peace without confessing they were the plan. Between placements, you check knots at the crate tethers and the little leash that steadies the ladder to the post. Elevation asks for courtesy from rope as well as from birds. You rub one square knot once with thumb and spit. It sits down and agrees to be square again. Above, rafters keep the thatch like an old broad back. You pat the beam with the same absent affection you use on good cattle. You do not speak much. When you do, your voice is the weight of sacks on a quiet cart. Roosters hear sense best when sense refuses applause. One tries a half-crow and swallows it because dusk inside the shutter says morning belongs elsewhere. You praise him with a cuff on his shoulder so light it could be a breeze. He pretends he did the praising. At the end, you make a small survey like a clerk with honest numbers. One balcony of elders at eye level with the beam. One balcony of juniors a rung below. One ambitious soul on the rail end with room for his tale to finish its thought without starting someone else's. Curtains, 2 sacks, and a folded shawl hang to break the lines of sight that make duels out of glances. The bowl is gone. The light is mild. The air moves without opinions. The ladder has become a quiet street with well-behaved doorways. You stand 2 rungs down so they see the top of your head, not the whites of your eyes. Creatures read altitude better than eloquence. When toes settle left, right, a small squeeze, you count to 8 for each. The old number that lets grip turn into understanding. Where a foot whispers of slip, you add a breath width of sack under the rung. Where a tail writes a complaint on the air, you move its author the space of 2 fingers, and the complaint forgets itself. At last you step off and look from the floor. The way you will look in the dark when listening will do more than climbing. The perches read as calm. Pride has been given work. Watch this. Own that. Stand here, and work has made it modest. The hens below change nothing. They murmur, arrange, and let the elevated parliament believe in its balcony. You tie one last soft line from ladder side to stall post. A reminder that storms write surprises and ladders should not. Before you leave, you lay a single barley kernel on the highest rung, and another on the lowest. A private joke between you and gravity. Then you smooth the air with your hand, and the room decides to keep the joke to itself. You close the shutter a finger more, and listen until the ladder speaks only in breath. You fetch a bundle of spare laths from the byre wall, thin ash and alder strips that have been loitering, like shy cousins at a wedding. You turn each in your hands until the grain tells you which piece wants work and which wants to dream. 2 bow a little. One behaves like a ruler. One remembers a knot the way an old man remembers a joke. You take 4 and leave the sentimental willow behind to practice being useful later. Up the stable ladder you go, breath level, socks quiet. Rafters wait like ribs holding a patient chest. You slide the first lath across the gap between beams and let it settle the width of a breath. Pegs next. 3 oak pegs shaved last winter, pressed home with a soft mallet that never raises its voice. Each gives that kind thud which means wood has agreed to become family. You breathe through your nose so dust learns to settle politely around you. Very good. You bind the lath with flax in your square knot over, under, back through. Snug knot heads turn toward you so they can be scolded in the dark if they forget their job. A second lath sits a hand's breadth away. Between them you string a loose midline, not a rope, a reminder, so crates nod and then remember not to wander. You run your thumb along the span, push, release, push, release. The roof listens and says, that will do. A splinter dreams of fame near your cheek. The back of your knife persuades it to be modest. You rub a breath of tallow along the edge so feathers will slide instead of catching. A third lath angles toward the shutter. A fourth meets a fat beam that has seen more weather than gossip. You set them in a faint V so any basket that thinks itself a boat will quietly drift back to the middle and reconsider poetry. Above the ladder mouth you add a small terrace, 2 cleats, and a strip, just enough shelf for your wrist. When the queen's basket needs carrying 1 rung farther on a damp night, you try the move without cargo. Up, heel, hip, set, hands free. Smooth as a prayer that has forgotten it used to be work. Now you test the little net, not with bravado, with the weight of your palm and the politeness of breath. Peg heads sit proud enough to pinch if needed, not proud enough to steal a feather. The midline hums when plucked and shuts up when released. The V keeps its quiet geometry, neither bragging nor sulking. From below, the new wood looks like nothing a good result. The best help disappears. Down you go for an insurance lath. You lay it near the ladder so a future, You won't have to think when thinking is in short supply. The mallet returns to its peg, the knife slides into the beam crack, leftover flax coils like a sleepy snake, and waits. Air moves through the shutter with better manners now. The loft answers by smelling a little more of straw and a little less of weather. You sit on the top step and listen. The broody shifts once in her curtain basket and forgives architecture. Hens along the bar adjust toes and discover they approve of stability. The crates nod and then forget to move at all. Outside, rain edits its sentence and keeps only commas. Inside, laths offer exactly what you asked for. Higher, drier, calmer, written in wood. You nod once, satisfied. Done. You sort the old sacks as if tasting stew nose first, then fingers, then the quiet memory of which cloth behaved well under rain. Linen with honest patches, hemp with proud seams, coarse flax with a mouse's autograph, a congregation of fabric that refuses to retire. You shake each in the doorway so dust can remember the road. Dust leaves like a trained dog. For the nursery crate, you choose a wide-mouthed sack whose hem carries winter's patient stitches. Small knots, like rosary beads. A thumb of beeswax rubbed along the upper edge teaches drops to gather into pearls and fall, not creep. You draw the cloth over the willow rim and pull 2 ears for ties neither drum-tight nor slack, so air may visit without arriving with luggage. You cut a thumb-width window and back it with a square of horn from a retired lantern pane, stitched with flax thread that holds. The broody deserves the softer sack, the one that smells faintly of last year's barley. You hem its edge with a running stitch so fray will tire itself with honest work. Lowered, the curtain turns her basket into a small province, with borders and tacks paid in warmth. One amber eye gleams through the window, reviews policy, and accepts it without speech. Along the lower bar, you hang a shawl made from a narrower sack, split up the back and weighted with 2 slim reeds. Peg loops catch on the new lath above. The cloth hangs an inch from combs, interrupting the straight glances that hatch quarrels. It looks like nothing. That is the point. At the plank that sometimes inherits the roof's forgetfulness, you lay a folded sack as a runner. A reed wedge persuades it into a lip, and you aim the lip toward the ditch, so water chooses a destination with manners. A strap and wooden button give you a flap for the ladder mouth, quick to close if wind decides to edit the loft after dark. You practice fastening it with both hands full, and again, with both pretending to be birds. Both attempts pass. Smell matters. Damp cloth invites the wrong congregation. You rub a pinch of crushed thyme into hymns a whisper, not a sermon, so the air remembers kitchens rather than cellars. One sack gets a thin clay wash, just enough to stiffen threads so rain beads and rolls off for its first hour. The color deepens to tea and then forgets it ever wished to be water. You mark each cloth with chalk. Nursery, Queen, bar shawl, Louisiana DDR flap. 2 spares hang near the shutter, where wind can announce its intentions. A rolled sack waits by the post as an all-purpose hood. For a sudden drip, a boastful rooster, a corner that forgets itself. It swings once and rests. A drop tests your work. It beads, hesitates, leaps away. The broody does not blink. The nursery awning pats small rain and returns it to straw like a careful host. Under the shawl, a hen discovers the pleasure of preening without an audience. From the doorway, you watch cloth turn weather into fairness. Light pools against the horned window like butter. Air goes about its business. The sacks write a law across the loft. Higher, drier, calmer, in thread. You stroke the knotted ties the way you stroke good rope gratitude without ceremony, and tuck the needle into the curtain seam where your fingers will find it in the dark. You let the room keep its promises without you watching. Very well. Midday seeps rather than strikes. Light slides along boards until even the broom leans into its own shadow. You rest your back against the stable post and let the grain print its patient map into your shoulder. Rain hums the thorough, many-handed song of bees. The grammar you set before noon holds. Planks lie like commas. The ladder bridge pretends to be a quiet log. In the loft, voices have softened into breath. The woven sound of feathers settling is like cloth, folded by an ant. The broody's curtain lifts a thumb to show an eye, then lowers. Monarchy naps without apology. You listen for mischief and hear none. Water keeps to the paths you offered. The ditch unties itself at the gate and flows on without tugging. One drop finds the queen's awning and changes its mind. The ash you dusted on the first rung remains matter of fact, turning slippery into clarity. You thank ash by forgetting it. Idle hands remember courtesies. You wipe the knife's back against your sleeve until horn and steel show the square of window clearly. You polish the lantern's pane until milk becomes butter. You smooth the rope tails where knots sit, not to retie, only to remind. Rope like doors, children and weather improves with quiet praise for not doing anything dramatic. Light becomes a patient soup, pooling in upturned bowls, laying itself against the shawl on the bar, resting in a small rectangle where the shutter admits a sky. Dust learns to fall politely. The chicks sleep in a heap that explains warmth better than any sermon. When one thought rolls away, it returns without apology. Your hand passes above them and becomes weather. They do not wake. The queen breathes in slow paragraphs. Your ribs imitate her punctuation and discover the line easier than pride would admit. Far off, someone knocks a pin into a gate. Someone coughs in a field that should be dry. A single laugh decides not to travel. None of it reaches here. Your world is the distance between door and ladder, the little republic above the stable, and the ditch reading the same safe sentence. You review tasks and issue pardons. Pegs hold. Cord keeps its sermon. Sacks perform their soft laws. There is nothing to fix that touching would not worsen. You practice the old luxury, doing nothing correctly. Nothing is inspection without hands. It keeps boards from learning fear. On the post by your shoulder, you once cut a notch to remember a rough year. Your fingers find it now and measure this hour against that one. This is not that. This is the quiet profit of ladders and the affordable price of pegs. You feel taller without moving, as if ribs could borrow height from rope and straw. Rain continues its bee-song. You remember honey, not taste, only the notion of summer stored for weeks like this. You think of brewers who buy barley in generous seasons and leave their spent sweetness for the birds, of neighbors with skeps who say mild saints and mild bees. You bless nothing. You agree to be unremarkable. The house rewards you by remaining itself. Before you move, you touch the latch string, not to pull, only to remind it of later courtesy. Then your eyes make the least possible round. Loft, rope, mat, bridge, gate. Every name answers present. You nod, because grace can be said without bread, when feathers are quiet and water minds its place. You breathe, and the room breathes back with you. Both choose slower. You cross to the neighbor's yard because courtesy and poultry stray by the same small roads. The ladder bridge keeps its good manners. The soot-marked rung nods like an usher. At his gate, you sound the wooden clapper twice polite, not panicked, and wait long enough to prove you are not bringing fire. He appears with straw in his beard and a coil of rope on his arm, which counts as greeting. You offer the errand. A quiet look for wanderers and nonsense. He agrees with the shrug reserved for weather, and fetches his staff with the notches thumb and a half too. You trade glances that already know bells and ditches. Then you step into his byre, where the air smells of patient cattle and hay that remembers sun. His loft is cousin to yours. Bars, straw, baskets. A curtain that moves with good manners. A single feather rides a draft like a lost coin, then gives up and lands. In the corner, a clay dish remembers warm mash and glows with an honest smell. It pleases you. Today, you keep your voice under barley and your hands at your sides, so feathers will not invent a crisis. The up, per bar, accounts for itself quickly. The lower offers a complaint from a hen who believes destiny hides in drafts. You follow the sound to a gap between sack and wall. You let your sleeve become new wall and wait while her certainty melts. You show your palm yesterday's palm, today's promise. She steps onto it with the caution of a citizen invited to serve. One hand under breastbone, one hand over folded wings. Dignity escorted, not seized. At the latter mouth, she rehearses the idea of down. You carry her anyway, so memory owes you nothing. Back up, you stoop for the shy brown that becomes straw when no one looks. She reveals herself by blinking when you breathe. An apology of cloth along her shoulder, then your hand. She consents and travels the careful road back over bridge and plank to your house, where she behaves as if her own bar had never been far. Pride survives wet weeks by pretending distance is rumor. Behind a crate, a late chick stands frozen by the only magic it knows. Your palm becomes warm ground and slides under the spell. Tiny toes test certainty and accept. Down your coat it goes, a quiet parcel. Then into nursery straw, where the pile opens, swallows, and becomes itself again. You walk back to settle small debts. The neighbor asks after bell patterns. You answer, 2 means watch, 3 the ford, 4 is for sluices. He shows you the reed he drops in puddles to see which way it thinks. You show him the straw slip you lodge in the latch to learn if water has been nosy. Folk methods trade like vegetables and keep well. At the bridge you hand him a spare peg, and he returns a twist of oats. Accounts balanced without talk. He tries your soot-notched trick on his good rung, while you sand a splinter on his rail with the back of your knife. Improvements that look like nothing last longest. Back in your loft, you count by breathing. In 16, out 16. All faces present by rhythm. The broody's curtain lifts and lowers on its own tide. You smooth the straw where the traveler argued with geography and let the room forget that conversation. Then you step down and let your boots tell the yard you are finished being interesting. You test the tethered crates, the way a careful person tests a chair by listening with your hand. The nursery boat hangs from its low leash. Ash skids beneath, leather feet shyly proud. You rest a steady forearm on the rim until the lines speak their quiet language and say enough. The Queen's boat, higher, answers with a slower nod learned from dignity. You bring the trial barrel and pour in ditch water to a thumb's depth color of tea, smell of reed and last summer. The nursery crate settles into it and remembers how to refuse sinking. The line curves like a good sentence. The belly toggle keeps its virtue. You push the rim, let go, count to 8. By 4 the crate returns to itself. By 6 it forgets ambition. Indecision is excellent boat manners. You flick the awning forward. Drops gather at the waxed hem and leap down instead of creeping in. The horned window blooms like butter. Inside, a chick investigates the new horizon with grave attention. The pile opens, receives and recloses, as if repeating a prayer. At the Queen's boat, you audit knots like a clerk. Square, square bow, tails generous. One square has grown proud. Your thumb and spit return it to humility. The beamline has a lazy twist. You unmake it and breathe patience back into the lay. Above, the new laths behave as if they were born prudent. You open the shutter a finger to learn how a stray gust intends to talk. It arrives with wet breath and no argument. The awnings ignore the speech. You lift the nursery boat 1 inch and let it fall that inch. Rope hums. Willow sighs. Water hushes nobody trying to be news. For memory, you chalk tiny dashes beside the key knots. 1 for today's height, 2 for clever rain. If the beam complains, you will know whether to shorten or trust. A slim reed set as a telltale near the belly will kiss the slats only when you owe the world another inch of prudence. Below, the floor keeps a damp map where silt writes in pale lines. You draw finger gutter across straw so any new bead chooses a road with manners. The path leads to a reed mat that believes in service. You lift its corner, dry underneath. You set it back and do not mention it. You repeat the trial with the second barrel, fuller, to learn how boats behave when the yard forgets itself. The nursery boat nods, travels half a finger, and is recalled by its tether. The Queen's boat hardly notices. Hierarchy that serves rather than boasts deserves to last. A hen watches, uninterested. The rooster pretends it was his idea. The broody breathes like a statue conducting warmth. Silence passes for applause here. You step to the ladder post and tie a messenger line to your wrist rehearsal, only for the hour when both hands will be busy, and you will still need to belong to the room. 2 tugs mean stop, 3 mean pull, 4s are for neighbors. Outside, the ditch composes a longer sentence. You answer by placing a new peg beside the far stile and hanging the spare lath near the ladder mouth. The barrels are emptied respectfully back to the ditch. The boats drip dignity and dry. You leave lines a finger longer than comfort and a finger shorter than fear. In weather, that is the whole arithmetic. You nod. Enough. You breathe slower. Matching the room, calm repeats itself, until courage stays. Evening puts the tools away without asking your permission. You trim the tallow with your thumbnail, touch a coal to the wick, and let Horn turn a small flame into butter that minds its manners. You carry the lantern low so shadows walk up the walls, not along the floor. Hens forgive walls. They mistrust floors. The lower bar gets counted first, though not allowed. Numbers work better in your chest. Toes left, toes right, grip and settle. You slide one hen the width of 2 fingers so her glare misses the neighbor. You edge another toward the shawl until suspicion becomes drowsy grooming. Your sleeve speaks more than words. The balcony rung waits for the rooster. You smooth the keel with one palm, roof his wings with the other. Lift until pride becomes posture rather than speeches. He lands, folds, and invents a horizon with his tail. He tries half a crow and swallows it when the shutter says dusk. Silence is maturity. You reward it with nothing at all. You tip the lantern so buttered light glances inside the broody's curtain. Water dish, present. Mash dish, present. A fingertip over straw finds the small round crowns by feel, not by moving anything, only remembering roundness. The curtain falls back into evening. The queen returns to measuring warmth with her breastbone. Chick Island receives the lantern like weather. You lower the board one finger so curiosity can look out and then choose sleep anyway. A chick practices a sentence of preening and forgets the ending. Another pecks the rim. Learns bowls tell the truth, even in dim rooms. The warm stone is retired to the shelf. The pile has learned to be its own hearth. Rope rounds come next. You visit beam leash, post line, crate tether, ladder tie, saying each one's name with your hand. A square knot has grown theatrical. Thumb and spit make it modest again. The messenger line gets a polite tug and answers in your other palm. Awake, patient. The room's vocabulary is simple and sufficient. Above, rafters settle the way old backs do. One small sigh and then agreement. The curtain breathes a slow square. Straw answers with a soft tide sound. You lower the wick a hair to teach the dark to arrive kindly. The hens accept the lesson by not mentioning it. The rooster adjusts and remembers dignity. Lantern breath warms edges into honesty. A lath wants a breath of tallow. A reed mat needs a peg 1 inch inward. The sack shawl has earned a new loop. You oblige quiet requests quickly, so night won't compose excuses. The loft answers by smelling less of weather and more of straw and content animals. You stand at the door and dim the wick. Outside, the ditch pronounces long vowels. The bell does not clear its throat. Ducks pass the lane with the heavy decorum of officials leaving a meeting. Inside, Horn makes a ghost light after snuffing. Darkness settles into known furniture rather than surprises. You take your place at the top step and count by breathing. In 8, out 8, proof that heads are present without seeing them. When you descend, you step backward so you become smaller instead of vanished. Vanishing invites curiosity. Shrinking invites sleep. At the threshold, you set the sack snake neatly against the sill and draw the ladder flap strap across with that easy peg and button you trusted at noon. You turn the horn pane inward so moonlight looks like furniture, not invitation. The stable keeps its patient warmth, and the house offers a floor that has learned quiet. Evening can end. Night belongs to people who take turns. You knot your cloak at the throat, pocket the reed whistle you will not use, and loop the messenger line twice around your wrist before stepping into the yard. Planks are darker. The ladder bridge is a patient underline. The ditch speaks more slowly now, as if counting itself. First round, no lantern. Light solves less than you once believed. Hearing and map do the work. Boots remember where boards end and earth begins. At the gate post, the wet mark rests where you left it. At the sill, the sack snake minds its oath. Rope angles remain sensible. You breathe the inventory, and the yard agrees. At the neighbor's line, you give 2 soft tugs. His spoon answers twice from the window. Awake, bored, good. You propose the hours, his turn in 1, your return in 2, unless bell or line says otherwise. He grunts the sound men use for rain. The village becomes 2 circles of footsteps keeping the same slow idea. Where lane meets ditch, you listen with your cheekbone, not your ear. Wood post, wet air, low sky add what ears miss. A frog sings. Ducks attempt democracy and abandon it. A gate squeaks and wind edits it into memory. None of this requires lantern or speech. You sign the night with silence and walk on. Your breath makes small clouds that fold themselves and vanish by the hedge. Haines do not notice. Good night. Back at the loft, you open the shutter one finger and stand like furniture. Feather breath counts itself. No foot argues with a bar. The broody's curtain lifts and lowers on her private tide. You touch the line tails once more, beam, post, ladder, and tuck them like a blanket corner. Chalk writes on the doorpost. First round, steady. Second round earns a mean wick in the horn lantern, barely language enough to turn ruts into marks. You check the outside peg beside the far stile. It is not traveled. A reed cross, floating in the lane pool, points downstream. Good. The staff notch meets water at thumb and a hair. Yesterday's same. You nod, and the nod is the best kind. You leave a heel of bread and a sip of thin ale on your neighbor's sill, and trade 3 tugs for one. His shift now. His steps cross the bridge measured. He has no time to invent a fall. Between houses, the dark becomes divided labor. That is order enough for water. You pass the forge lane and smell old iron remembering heat. You pass the dye vat and hear cloth telling lies about color to itself. You mark both for later errands and keep your feet for the map you are walking. Maps built by feet are the only ones weather respects. Back home, you write a second line on the post, still steady, and draw a barley dot beside it in the old private code. That means sleep is allowed in cuffs and boots. Before lying down, you visit the loft again and let the room draw your breath. In, 8, out, 8. The rooster mutters a punctuation mark and forgets it. Chick Island twitches, recnits, and returns to doctrine. You lie on the bedboard with hand through the messenger loop and feet toward the door. If the line speaks, your hand answers before your mind invents reasons. The hour arrives, sits like a sensible dog, and passes on to wake the neighbor. You share the dark until it becomes boring again. That is victory. Morning smells different after a night that kept its promises. The ditch keeps a slow sentence. The gatepost wears yesterday's dot, and nothing more. You take the broom not as a weapon, but as punctuation, and sweep the night into corners. Planks find their grain again. The ladder bridge bows to common sense. The mat shakes out courage and stays modest. You open the shutter to pewter light and let air fold through the loft. Hens yawn with their necks. You lift the shawl from the bar and hang it to dry. It drips like a clock. The broody receives review. Water, mash, a fingertip over the round crowns. The curtain returned to the business of borders. The nursery awning gets shaken once and laid to sun where it will forget rain. You shorten the leashes by a thumb, now that barrels have been poured back to the ditch. Boats become crates again. Leather feet kiss dry boards. Knots get one more blessing, a pull, a pat, a look, and then a holiday. The reed telltale under the nursery ribs sits an honest space from the slats. That is the news you like. Outside, you rake the thin braid of silt away from the bridge stile so mud will not propose a dynasty. You freshen the ash line on the first rung. At the gate, you press palm and cheek to the post. Cool, not cold. Damp, not climbing. You draw a second chalk dot to thank the night. Sun helps dry cloth. Across the lane, the neighbor lifts his staff like a salute and points his chin at the ducks, who have decided puddles are theology. You permit them their church and keep your hens to their tidy monastery. He brings your borrowed peg. You hand him a twist of oats. Accounts, balanced with no words. Tools go home. The mallet finds its peg. The spare lath waits by the ladder for a day that thinks it is clever. The door, snake coils by the sill. The horn pane gets a cloth until it is clear. Rope tails roll into neat mouths that do not bite. The loft sheds its boat words and becomes itself again. Because gratitude is a chore, you tend to little thanks. A scrape of tallow on the friendly rung. A wedge tucked straighter under the shy corner of a crate. A barley kernel where the rooster will find it right when you need his attention to turn into obedience. A palm along the top bar so it remembers your hand when storms audition again. You sit on the top step and let morning count through you. In, 8, out, 8. The flock answers with soft arithmetic. Chick Island wakes in sections, then becomes a pile again. You lift the warm stone to the shelf. The pile has earned autonomy. Hens descend with the serious faces of accountants and discover breakfast kept its appointment. The neighbor meets you at the bridge and trades rumor for rope. The sluice held. The bell slept. The ford behaved. You say nothing witty. Wit is for dry weeks. You return his line. He ignores thanks. Friendship keeps balance the way laths do quiet, with small pegs. The day can be ordinary again. When the sun remembers brightness, the yard reads as calm handwriting. Boards say sentence. Mat margin, crates footnote. Rope conjunction. You let the broom rest and give the day back its ordinary nerves. Haya, drier, remains. You speak it anyway low, for yourself, and tie the thought to the post with nothing more than another nod. You sit quiet with the board's plain comfort under you, and let the morning's thin light learn your breath. The yard has no appetite for story. It prefers its ordinary grammar. Door, plank, mat, rope, post. You prefer it too. You stroke the ladder's soot mark once, not to summon courage, only to greet an old trick that did what you asked. The ditch keeps its slow sentence and forgets to argue. Ducks write footnotes in mud and then go elsewhere to repeat themselves. Hens practice the small art of being where they said they would be. You listen until listening stops needing ears. In the loft, feather sound becomes the room's steady clock. A chick stirs, remembers the pile, and returns to it like a good thought. The broody's curtain lifts and lowers with her private tide. Rope becomes a still line rather than a question. Crates are only crates now, not boats rehearsing. The reed mat wears a quiet shine, where the world used to draft itself through the corner. Nothing asks for improvement. Nothing asks to be told. You stand as if standing were something the floor whispered you might enjoy. You tidy as if tidying were how hands say thank you. A wedge nudged straight. A curl of shaving brushed into your pocket to flavor the day with clean wood. A bowl set on its better side. You leave the door a finger open because air is better at your work than you are. You leave the latch string plain because obedience, like calm, starts unadorned. From the threshold, you let your eyes take the long path. Gate to plank to bridge to sill to bar to basket to curtain to thatch to sky. The world answers by declining to do anything remarkable. You reward it with the smallest of nods, the one you use for saints and tools. You tell the day softly, so it can keep its own counsel that you will be here again when water remembers its tricks and birds remember their ideas. For now, higher, drier, calmer is a lesson well kept. You put it away like a folded cloth. You let the house yawn. You let yourself yawn back. We hope this quiet step into another time has left you feeling rested. If you've enjoyed it, you're welcome to like, share, or leave a gentle note. And if you'd like more slow walks through history, you can subscribe and join us again. End of script. Sweet dreams.